Yeah, I okay. Um, okay, so that's tier one sessions like this. So the first two are being held virtually, and then the next ones are going to be held in person across the province. So in a little bit, I'll kind of show you where those will be in case you know someone else who would be interested. So tier two, we're calling connection, and that will give our members the opportunity to see the actual implementation of the best practices and other things that will be discussed here. As well, we're hoping that it strengthens the network amongst our producers who are working towards kind of a common goal of improving the efficiencies of their operation. And then tier three, which is peer learning, or you'll hear us call it CI challenges. So in that case, a farm or facility with an already identified need will host this CI challenge. And then participants like you or others from other farms will be brought in and led through the process of identifying solutions for that problem. And so we're going to try to group these three workshops somewhat commodity specific so that you can go to one that will have the most relevant problem to your operation. And so tiers 4 and 5 are the more kind of in-depth or intensive ones. So they're going to be support for our farm owners and operators who are looking to implement actual changes based on these methods and to do so kind of right away. So in these final two pieces, that's where funding is actually available. So we have some funding from a couple sources that we're going to put into this. So if you choose to participate in one of these two, so tier 4 ideally, and then tier 5 is just kind of that extra step if you need a boost. But they will involve hiring specialists in continuous improvement, such as people from Barrington who are with us today, and they will help with the implementation. But we're going to reimburse up to 85% of those costs. So there is a little bit of a buy-in from the farm owner, but you can get up to 85% of that back. And those who participate in those final two tiers are going to need to apply. So we'll have a set of guidelines go out and applications, and from that we have enough funding to choose 10 to proceed. And so the application guidelines are going to start to be sent out in May, or be available in May, and we will accept submissions starting July 1st. And so the hope is that we'll have everything wrapped up by the end of January of 2023, which gives us a little bit of buffer kind of fiscally. And then, yeah, we'll go from there, and hopefully this is something that we'll keep doing.
Excellent. All right, so if anybody's got any immediate questions for Caitlin, please open up your mic and open that, or type it into the chat. And please do that. If not, I'll just kind of continue on here. I do want to introduce my colleague Dave Benson. He and I work together at Barrington, so Dave has joined us today as well. So just so you know that as well. Any questions for Caitlin? No? Okay. If any come up, we've got lots of time, so feel free to bring those up. We've got a fairly small group at the moment, so I'm kind of, this is the tours that will be we're going on tour. I've never said that. That's kind of cool. Yeah, so we've got these two virtual sessions. This one is obviously today, but in May we're going to be in Windsor, and in July Antigonish, in October in Truro, and then October 18th we're going to be in Berwick. So yeah, we need a poster. We need a poster with, yeah, we need to do something.
I'll get comms on it.
Exactly, right. So yeah, so we're excited to be able to be in your neighborhood sometime soon. So that's just kind of Alan, you typed in there, and Chelsea, you typed in. So where you're from, River John in for you, Chelsea, and you're in Kings County there, Alan. Both of you are, I'm going to ask, are you guys farm operators, just so that I kind of have an idea of who I'm talking with? I see Alan nodding. Yeah. Okay. Chelsea? Yes, hands up. Good. Thank you for that. Look at that. See, you got the emoji down. How about you, Niels? in a position to be able to type or let me know where you're from. And I see Charlotte too. Charlotte, where which part of the province are you with? So Niels is in Kings County as well. Okay, great. Charlotte, any type up there where you're from? Kind of gives me a bit of an idea. Okay. All right, well, I'll let you go there. Here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to open up your microphones and let's have a bit of a discussion. Thank you. Mostly listening. Okay, there we go. Hey, life of a farmer, right? Well, you get it. Thank you for that. You may not be in a position to be able to listen today, but if you're in a position to listen today, if you're able to participate in this discussion, I'd be really interested to hear what you have to say, and maybe Alan or Charlotte or Chelsea, if you can type in, it would be really good with your mic open, if not in the chat. Which of these concerns you most? And you don't have to pick one, but just think about these things as they relate to your business and the challenges that you're facing. What kind of areas do you want to think about and focus on? What concerns you?
You want hands up, or do you just want us to?
Yeah, no, great.
Fire
no, fire away, Alan. Thank you.
All right. Looking at that list, I mean, it's so to give you a bit more background, we're a vegetable farm in Kings County, and we have about, at peak season, we've got about 45 temporary farm workers that come in and help us out. So growing cauliflower, cabbage, spinach, green onions, that sort of thing. So we certainly have labor challenges. I mean, we've relied on the foreign labor pool since I was young, since the early or mid to late 80s, I guess it's been. And so that's always a challenge, but then we're also, there's significant pressure on our costs of production right now, with not just right now, but always inflation and everything else that goes into it. So I would say there's quite a few points on that list that I would say are concerned, but it would be mostly around the labor, the operating costs, and there's always pressure on your top line too, in terms of product pricing and stuff. So especially in our market, where in our commodities, where we're dealing directly with retailers. So yeah, that's
okay.
my thoughts on it.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in? Anybody else want to weigh in with what concerns? What are your concerns? And so, do you echo Alan's comments as it relates to labor, and specifically, foreign labor that's coming in and/or cost of operation? How are the others feeling?
Hi, Gary. This is Chelsea.
Hi, Chelsea.
I'll be completely honest. A little bit of, I guess, an intro for myself. I'm first generation farmer, and it's actually my first year farming. We purchased a 1.5 acre perennial market garden in River John, Nova Scotia, with a total of 6.5 acres. And I am not so much the green thumb. I'm in the operation side of things. My partner is a horticulturalist, and he'll be taking care of our vegetable stock, to say the least. So for me, one of my biggest concerns obviously is getting to know the ropes, but on top of everything, it'll be the quality of whatever product we're able to produce and provide to the customer, and just making sure that because we want to keep everything as organic and clean as possible, just to provide that top-notch product for our clients. I want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can that's also sustainable and cost effective to be able to do that. So I have a giant balancing act in front of me, and I think this session in and of itself will be a big learning experience for me.
Great. Well, thank you, Chelsea. And yeah, so, well, hey, congratulations on the new farm. And yeah, the nice thing is that you can start with, you've got no habits to break at the moment. You could just jump right in with whatever good things that you see and feel are going to work for you. So that's really a positive thing. So great. Good. Anybody else? Nicholas, nice of you to join us and turn your camera on. Thank you for that. Always nice to see the people on the other side. Any of these things jump out at you?
I guess at this point, this year, definitely looking at, the increase in costs. pretty significant. So my background, well, my background goes back mostly in dairy industry over the last 15 years or so, but my farm is honeybees and honey, so doing pollination. And so looking at what those increased costs are just in your run of a year, and then, you know, questioning whether you can actually pass all those costs on or not. And, you know, it ends up being a pretty big jump to maintain those same margins you had before, or percentage margins. So you end up looking at slightly shrinking on a percentage basis just to kind of continue. And so it's kind of definitely interesting, and definitely, you know, I also sell sugar syrup in bulk to anyone, you know, bringing in a tanker load. And so, you know, my original model for that was to try to have a stable price that, you know, can be relied upon. And you know, with the change in input costs so drastically, you know, you can't even, there's not even enough room there to, you know, have a stable price and you know, just take the ups and downs. So now you have to follow the market price in a commodity that there's not posted market prices all the time. So you know, you have to either contact the supplier, you know, monthly or weekly to get an updated price to really keep you in the ballpark. And because when you see price declines in the future, customers are going to expect a decline as well. So if you have a price up, they're still going to want the decline.
Right.
And so it's, you know, that's one of my biggest, I wasn't planning on there being a labor component to tracking that cost all the time. And now it comes into play. So it's
interesting. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Anyone else? Charlotte, do you want to weigh in? Or I know Niels is spreading manure, so we may not hear from him, but Charlotte? Just let you, maybe just, if you're talking, you're on mute. If you're not, feel free to type in, or otherwise I'll just continue, but appreciate that. So another little tiny bit about Dave and I at Barrington. So I've been doing some work in the last couple of years with farmers. Actually, I did some work with Maplewood Farms, the chicken. They run the chicken producing farm for Eden Valley Poultry, and that's how I got to know them, because I did a couple of years supporting Eden Valley Poultry with their processes. So I'm going to share a little bit about what I did with Kim and Joel Sheffield at Maplewood Farms a little bit later on today. But that's really what got me sparked and interested in supporting the farming industry, because I started to realize how much opportunity there is. So for all of you, you know, all of the concerns that you've raised that I've listed there, you know, we really can, the tools that I'm going to show you today that we can work through together a little bit, I think you'll find those quite effective in helping you in those areas that concern you most. It's interesting. The Associated Industry Sector Councils did some surveys, and I don't know whether any of you were part of that survey or not. But the two things that jumped out off of that survey when I saw the results was the whole component, as Alan brought it up, was around labor retention. And you'll see that 26% said getting good qualified labor and retaining good qualified labor was a major component of their business. And then the other thing that came to play is technology. So you'll see that it says increased technology. 22% of those surveyed said that they were planning to introduce technology at some point in the next 2 to 3 years. So how does that weigh in with you folks? Do you guys see technology kind of coming more into play? Do you think technology is potentially the answer to your shortage of labor? How do you see technology come into play?
I'll go ahead if
yeah, please, Alan. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So for us, it's a big piece of our puzzle, and we're constantly looking to adopt current technologies that we perceive and kind of do the math on that will be effective in streamlining and giving us a return that we need to move forward. So It's for us, it's a big piece. For example, we've replaced our whole transplant system in the last year, and that knocks about 8 jobs off the front of the season that were always hard to handle and deal with and manage. So always looking, sure.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Nicholas, I see you nodding your head there. Do you see technology in your industry as?
I'm agreeing. So, you know, in the honeybee industry, I'm still working out on where technology will come into play. I've done a little bit of investment in hive sensors and apps for tracking the beehives and stuff. Struggling with the cost of build, you know, the feasibility analysis on that in this particular industry. But my day job is working with De Laval with the robotic milkers and herd navigator. So I'm very familiar on the tech side, on the dairy industry, and that, you know, all those similar things that Alan talked about. You know, robots are coming into play very quickly as soon as labor pops up on people's radars.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Dave and I have a colleague, Robert Newcomb, who their family farm is the Cornwallis farm. For those of you, probably most of you would know the Cornwallis farm, and the Newcombs. And our colleague Robert is connected to that. He grew up on that farm, and so you know, again, him and his family have been keeping us pretty well apprised to some. What I'm also kind of mindful of is, and this is something that I'm actually attending the CME conference in May, and they've asked me to be a part of the panel on Industry 4.0. So for those of you who don't know what Industry 4.0 is, it's really about how technology is coming into play in all kinds of different industries, and what's the impact of that, not only on jobs, because there's a part of that, but on the industry and things. And one of the kind of the challenges, and I'm not suggesting that technology isn't a good thing, because I think technology actually can produce more jobs if it's used right. It should increase your business, increase your need for more people. But bringing in technology, and I hope you can appreciate bringing in technology into an unstable or I'm using the term unstable. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. But when you bring a technology into an unstable process or an inefficient process, all that the technology does is magnifies the problem. It doesn't actually solve the problem. And so if you think about, again, this is just a generic statement, bringing in a piece of technology, if you don't have the flow in meeting the flow out, what happens if the flow in is the machine is not optimizing because you have to reduce whatever its capabilities and capacities and speed is in order, because you can't keep it fed. So that becomes part of a problem. Now you're not really getting the full value of the return on that piece of equipment. And if you do that, you also have whatever's on the other side of that piece of equipment. You've got to be able to balance that and take that away, or you're creating massive amounts of inventory that you now need to manage. And so that in and of itself has challenges, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So while technology can be really, really useful in helping organizations and farms and various industries in many ways, that I always throw this little cautious flag out that technology in a good process makes that process better. Technology in an ineffective or an inefficient process will only magnify the challenges associated with that process. So let me just pause there and see how you think about what I just said. Agree, disagree?
I think one of the additional things to say on that is oftentimes the technology is quantified in a different way than the industry normally quantifies it. So for instance, I'm going to use the dairy, robots in the dairy they max out at 60 cows or 65 cows, but the industry talks about, or you're getting paid on the number of kgs of milk produced. So it's actually output. The equipment is talked about in cow numbers, but the output is not what you're talked about on when you're looking at it. And just to look strictly at output, a typical robot, you can do your 3,000 kgs a day, but you can't do 3,000 on 80 cows. It's impossible to get that many cows through the robot to get that output. You can, if you're actually milking more than 6, if your kgs per cow is is lower, then there's another benchmark that you're working off of. And so it's changing your mindset around and saying, okay, no, we that equipment, even though it's, you know, everyone talks 60 based on my operation and my other, you know, same as what you're talking about, you know, the input into that equipment, right? If you're on a processing line, you know, that's your restricting factor, not actually what the equipment can do.
And that's a really, that's a great point, Nicholas. And when you think about things like the kg production, right? Anytime you have a commodity like milk or some other commodity type product, there's this whole supply and demand component that you have to balance too, right? So if every dairy farmer was able to produce, you know, the full maximum volume of milk, would the market be so saturated that now your price of that product now has to decline, as an example? And that may not be the case with milk, but you know, or do you have to think, okay, now I have so much product, I can't sell it for what its primary purpose was. I've now got to redo something with that. I got to turn it into something else. I got to, you know, I got to create powdered milk out of it, or I got to turn it into something else that the market can do because I've produced so much of it. And is there a cost associated with that? So the balance of that is again, probably a very delicate thing for you guys to manage. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Appreciate. Yeah. Thank you. So I'm just curious, where are you guys on this continuum of continuous improvement? I'm using the term Lean Six Sigma, but just in general, where are you with your kind of understanding of driving continuous improvement? Are you unaware? And again, type this into the chat if you would. It'd be great. I'm just curious. Are you unaware of what Lean Six Sigma and or continuous improvement really is all about? You're just tuning in because you're curious. Are you aware? But you're really not. You're kind of unclear about what it kind of means to you and to your operation and your farm, or you. Yeah, I understand it. I've kind of done a little research. I'm really curious. About learning how it is. And okay, so some of you are somewhere between. Alan says somewhere between unaware and understand. Do you believe it? In other words, you've done it. You've done a couple of continuous improvement type projects using a specific methodology, and you've got a result, and hey, I'm interested to learn more. Or are you, I call it the evangelist. So Chelsea's saying she's totally unaware. Great, looking to learn. Great. Okay, well, Alan, Nicholas, where are you? Somewhere on that continuum? And Niels, we'll just when you get an opportunity to tell me where you are, that's fine. But not sure exactly, Nicholas says. Okay, fair enough. So I'm going to, all right, fair enough. The goal here, of course, is for me to help you move along the spectrum, wherever you are on that spectrum. So if you are like Chelsea, this is a brand new concept. I'd like to really help you understand what it can do for you and the value of why you'd want to explore it further, and maybe look at these other opportunities that NSFA is providing for you. And if you're in the aware, and that again is just that solidifying of, hey, this is the right thing for me to be doing. Because here's what I'd like you to think about. This is going to take you back to your school days, but the whole idea of this formula, y is a function of x. Simply, the y is your output. Whether it's cauliflower, whether it's milk, whether it's honey, whether it's say vegetables, whatever your output is, the y is your output, the product that you're delivering to your customer. The function of x are all the inputs, all the things that go into making that possible. And some of those things are within your control and some of those things are not. And so what we try to do is we kind of look at those things that are in your control and say, okay, which of those are going to influence my output the most? Because if I can control them, then I can have a better understanding of what's going to give me my output. So the example I like to use and have used for many years is the whole idea of you know, I say going to work, but for many of you, work is just outside your front door. But for those that have an office to go to, right? You know, you think about going somewhere, and if you have an appointment to go somewhere, or if you're going to work in the morning and you have this target, I got to be to work by 8 o'clock, or you know, for many of you, it's probably 6, whatever, 3 in the morning. I don't know, but you have this targeted time to get to work. And then there's all these things that influence you, this function of X that influence you getting to work on time. So for us office workers, what do you think those things are that influence us to be able to get to the office on time? What do you think those are?
I was gonna say traffic.
So traffic, okay,
Much better
traffic
than
would be
the-
one.
The time that you leave, if you're late, it can add significant amount onto your commute.
So you just hit on two things. One of those you totally have control over. One of those, not so much. So the one of getting, leaving the house on time is an absolute critical input X that you manage as a person who's got to get to work on time. So that is critical. The other one is what do you think the other one is? If leaving the house on time is one of them, what's the other one?
Waking up on time.
Waking up on time, Caitlin, exactly, right? So waking up on time and leaving on time are those two things that you control and you monitor. And so when we think about Y as a function of X, while the weather is a factor and the transportation is a factor, and there's all kinds of, are the kids ready for school and the lunch is made, and there's all kinds of different factors that influence you to get to work on time, you manage your getting to work on time largely by those two components. We want to help organizations and businesses like yours look at your processes and say, what are the equivalents of get up on time and leave on time in your business? Because there's a lot of things that go on that you can't influence, but those two things you can. So if we can identify what those 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things are that you can influence, that's going to predict your output. The interesting thing is, chances are, and this I can speak from experience, that if you oversleep, if you get up late, you still leave the house on time. Because what you do is you say, okay, I got to change my processes. I got to change things in order to be able to leave the house on time. And so if you have these measurement places inside of your business processes, and for many of you, it could be days, it could be, you could be looking at things during the day or during the week, during the month. Most of what you do is, for many of you, it's seasonal. So your times become seasonal times. You have to plant at a certain time. You have to fertilize at a certain time. You have to harvest at a certain time. There's cycles to your processes. When we understand what those are and we can pinpoint them and measure them, we can start to influence the output. That's what this formula is. And so when we look at businesses, we kind of have to look at those things because there's a lot of things that influence us every single day over which we have no control over. And we have to kind of separate those and say, okay, I need to deal with circumstances. Let me give you the example about traffic. I'm going to work tomorrow and there's a traffic accident, delays me getting to work by 45 minutes. Would I change my process the following day because of an accident that stopped traffic for 45 minutes? No, right. So Nicholas is going, no, I wouldn't. I recognize it as a special cause. I recognize it to say, hey, that's not the norm. But if I'm going to work and I come across a guy with a stop sign and the payloaders are there and they're ripping their road up and they got pylons and they're directing me around, and I know that this is going to be a couple of weeks work anyway, I'm more likely to change my process. I'm more likely to think, okay, if I got to get to work on time, I got to do something different. And so again, when we look at our processes, we need to ask ourselves, when something influences us, that output of why, we have to ask ourselves, is that a special cause? Is that something I need to concern myself with and therefore need to change the way I do things? Or is that simply something that I just need to understand? I need to be able to, the next time it happens, I need to have an action plan around it, but I'm not going to change what I do every day because of it. And so we look at our businesses, we have to think of the difference between a special cause and what we would call common cause. Because once we see something as common cause, like an accident, like a construction, we have to say, okay, I gotta change the way I do things if I want my result to be different. And this is kind of plays into a little bit, Nicholas, about what you were talking about with the way that your industry is going up and down. And you say, hey, I want a kind of a fixed Y. I want kind of a fixed output. But I got all these things happening that are going to influence what that piece. And so we kind of need to think about, which ones of those are what I would call common cause and which one of those are special cause. And which ones do I need to react to and which ones don't I react to, but I need to be able to understand what, when it happens, here's how I respond. Any thoughts about that? Yeah, Alan says, what kind of mood your kids are in. Yeah, that'll tell you whether you get to work on time. Any other thoughts? Okay, so I'm going to introduce this idea of the 4 Ps plus T. This is not something I created. This is something that came through Toyota Production System, and the Toyota Production System, and globally it's been kind of adopted. And we've added the T. So the 4 Ps has come from Toyota. We've added the T, which is technology, because when this was first brought back in the early 60s. Technology didn't have the same role as it has today, right? The very fact that Nicholas can use an app to determine the health of his bees, the beehives is like, wow, think about that. So the 4 Ps plus T is something that we adopt today. And so the first P is purpose, right? Chelsea, I heard you talk about, how your goal is to provide sort of an organic, high quality product to your buyers, to your customers, right? You're doing that for a purpose. What is the purpose for why you want to do that?
We have this passion and this mindset that good quality food doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg, and it shouldn't come from outside of your local community. And we want to, through our greenhouses and stuff, try to provide stuff like product that isn't available due to seasonality being in northern Nova Scotia or across the rest of Nova Scotia, that people continue to purchase in big box stores that are coming in from different countries that we don't know the origin source of these products. And we want to give them to people, or try to give them year round, so people can see that it is possible to maintain sustainable vegetable consumption with everything that they like, not just potatoes and root vegetables, because that's what survives here all year round. And that way they can also try to close off their supply chain consumption as well. So we want to kind of take it back to community roots and supporting the local community with some really good tasting vegetables that maybe you can't get all year round.
Yeah, no, I think that's amazing, right? So that's a very clearly defined purpose. So every farm, and maybe Alan, I'll turn to you. Do you guys have you ever thought about, do you have a mission statement? Have you ever thought about creating one, or is it kind of like we produce what we produce, and how's that go for you?
Yeah, we do have one. I couldn't tell you what it is right off at the second, but
Okay.
it's in the book somewhere.
It's in the book somewhere. Okay.
Well, here it is right here, actually. Mission
Great.
is to maintain our position as an industry leader in Atlantic Canada in the ethical production and supply of wholesale cauliflower, spinach, bunch vegetables. So, I mean, ultimately, we're looking at our purpose is to provide a very high quality product at the lowest possible price we can provide it to the consumer, because we want to be cost effective and we want to be on their dinner plate at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think, you know what, that on the dinner plate, I think that's an awesome way to think about it, right? That's where you want your product. You want your product on the dinner plate. And I think that's an amazing way, kind of sums up what it is that you want to do. And there's a whole lot that goes in behind that. So that's the first P, that every organization needs to have its people, which is the second P, aligned to that purpose. Right. And so, you talk about your foreign workers and you talk about bringing in people, right? When they come in to do that kind of work, is the mission shared with them? Is the passion of why you got into this business in the first place, something that you can share and say, hey, this is why we do what we do here, and how do they buy in? Because people need to buy in to the purpose. Because when people buy into the purpose, then they'll start to do the right things to accomplish that purpose. And so, and there's ways you can do that. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. But when we think about lean and we think about driving continuous improvement, one of the first things nothing happens without the people. And so we need to think about, how do I engage the people to help me accomplish the purpose? And if the purpose is to accomplish at the lowest possible cost, that means, okay, we've got to understand what inefficiency looks like. We got to be able to identify when there's an opportunity to do something better, faster, cheaper. And so we need to kind of educate the people that are working for us that, hey, it's okay for you to tell us when things aren't working the way that you think. If you think there's a better way, tell us, because we need to hear, because we won't accomplish the purpose unless we maximize every opportunity within the people. And what they do, that the processes are how people accomplish the purpose. And so whether you have them documented or not, whether they're written down, whether they're posted on a wall, whether they're in a binder somewhere, right? You have processes for how you deliver the why. That function of X is a whole series of processes. You have this process as output. So your function of Y are these processes, and whether they're documented or not, they exist. And so if you're going to examine how you do things better, you kind of got to look at the processes and say, okay, how do we do things? If we do things this way, okay, is there a better way? And how do I know? And a lot of organizations kind of stop there. I can go into many, businesses, and I can ask, let me see your process maps for how you do this, or this, and they can whip them out of the computer. Or in the old days, they used to be able to be in a room somewhere, and they would bring out the big, unroll the chart and say, here's the process map. And many organizations stop there. What they don't do is they don't influence this fourth P. This fourth P allows you to work on the business, because while your people and your processes are working together, that's working in the business. That's delivering the purpose. You're in the business. You're doing the work every day. But to work on the business, you need to pause and look at your processes and go, there might be a better way to do this. And so organizations that do not have this fourth P in place, this discipline to say, if things are broken and things aren't working the way they should be working, we need to know about it. And we need to have a systematic way for addressing it. What do you think some of the symptoms are in a business that doesn't have that kind of mentality to say, hey, we got a problem. Let's talk about how we're going to fix it.
You might come in the form of employee turnover if they're feeling like they're not being heard, or they're not given the opportunity to relay their thoughts on improvements.
Absolutely.
One way.
Yep, one way. Excellent. What else?
Employees feeling undervalued, and you'll be missing more of a team atmosphere that you may be trying to achieve.
Yep, definitely. Chelsea, what do you think?
To go aside from the people side of things, it has a ripple effect. One problem, if it goes unaddressed for too long, will eventually cause other problems within your own, no matter what that is. So, and then you have to take time away from your regular scheduled programming to address a now bigger problem that you've just kind of swept under the rug for a while.
And that's kind of where it starts to manifest itself, because here's the interesting thing about people. People will accomplish the purpose. That's what we are. We're purpose driven, right? And so if you give somebody a goal, right, they will do what they need to do to get to that goal. So I'll use the example that if you had workers and you said, hey, I need this field cleared by, this patch of field cleared by a certain time of the day, and they had equipment, and the equipment, wasn't optimal, they would still do what they needed to do, try to get that field cleared by the end of the day, because you've given them the goal to do that, right? And so what happens is people will create workarounds. They'll think of other ways to get to the purpose. And those may not be the most effective ways. They may not be the most safest ways. There may be challenges associated with that. There, to your point, there could be stress. There could be, injury. There could be all kinds of things, because that's the way people are driven. Is if I've got a purpose and I've been given a purpose, I'm going to do what I can to do that. If they don't have the discipline to stop and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, the machines are not optimal, the equipment is not working the way that it should be working, or hey, listen, we're doing it this way, you know, there's maybe a better way that we could do this. And if you're not open to listening to those ideas and manifesting this idea of tell us what you think, right? We've hired you more than your hands. You're, you know, and this is true of every industry, by the way, right? That people, you know, especially in production, right? People on the front line, they come with lives, they come with brains, they've, you know, some of them are, you know, leaders of volunteer organizations outside of work that can have a whole lot of skills that they can bring in, that if we just took the time to listen to what they had to say about what it is that we do, that's part of the kind of the core of working on the business. And to Chelsea's point, if you don't pause long enough to fix the problem, it will manifest itself later. I don't know if you guys are on LinkedIn or not, but if you're on LinkedIn, you know, and connect with me, because I like to stay connected to the folks that I get a chance to talk to. But on that, I have a motorcycle. I love my motorbike. I ride my motorbike, and just this last weekend, I was out on my motorbike, and I did a little video. And what I said was, not every error leads to a defect. And so you can have errors, and if errors are ignored, there may not be an immediate consequence, to Chelsea's point. But an errors left unchecked will result in a defect. And I use the example of me driving my motorcycle and drifting across the center line while rounding a corner. Okay, that's an error. And if nothing's coming the other way, it's not going to cause a problem. It's not going to be a defect. But if I continually do that, eventually there's going to be something coming the other way, and that's going to be catastrophic. So not every error creates a defect, but compounding errors will eventually result in some form of defect. And so we need to think about that, and how do we take the time to recognize when there's an error in our processes that we really shouldn't ignore. Because if we can fix them now, fix them then, we're preventing further damage down the road. So let me just pause. What do you think of what I just said?
Yeah, that all makes sense. And I would say on our farm currently, we kind of informally have a lot of those discussions, but it's not formalized by any means. I'm always checking in with the different teams to see if there's anything we can change or improve, and kind of keeping an eye on their processes. But certainly a very important piece.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Alan. Yeah. So this is, I'm curious as to how you feel about these two statements, and I've inserted the farm picture, but I use this I use this slide in other presentations. But this, I'm just going to get you to read the difference between the traditional thinking and the CI, meaning continuous improvement thinking. Just read those two and tell me which one you most resonate with.
I would say it depends on the time of year and what's going on any given day, but I myself certainly like to think I'm on the right-hand side versus the left, but it's a bit fluid from time to time.
I can understand that. Yeah.
I'll have to agree with Alan. It's a little bit fluid sometimes, because I think it just depends right now, for us anyway, on the situation. There are some things we look at and we know, nope, we have to fix that now. Even if it's a 2 or 3 year process, we better start it now because it hasn't been started yet, and we'll have to keep dealing with the byproduct of the errors. But there are some things where we look at it and we're too busy to stop and make those improvements, or, you know, it's not broken, it's working right now, and it's not causing any of those deficiencies, or there's no deficiencies that we can project from it. So we just kind of let it lie and continue to do it effectively that way. And, you know, we can always revisit it in the future.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. Obviously, the idea is that you'd like to be on the right-hand side here, is the way you're thinking. But I totally understand, because I've been there Dave and I can attest to, even in our own work, right? It's really interesting when you teach and you talk about and you support organizations with driving continuous improvement, how you have to be very mindful is you got to practice what you preach. And so there's been times we've had to pause and say to ourselves, hey, we're letting this error go by. We need to make sure we address it. And specifically with us, and I'll put it right out there, I'll call it e-file management. We have a filing system and that we file all of our electronic presentations and the work we do with clients, and it could be a little bit more organized than it is, and we kind of know that. So we've kind of lately, the last several months, have really been focused on saying we just can't let this continue because it's going to create a problem for us down the road. So it happens to everybody, by the way, that you can be in both. So I'm not going to say we're perfect by any means.
I would say that if you're identifying that problem, even if you're not fixing it today, if your first opportunity, free time, whatever, is to fix it, or you create that plan, I would still say you fall on that CI side versus the traditional side.
Yeah, I agree, Nicholas. And later you're going to see where I encourage you to, as a part of your continuous improvement thinking, is to capture, create a log of all of those challenges and problems for the very reason you're talking about.
But I think if you get an opportunity a day that there is a break and you decide to take it as a break versus fix one of those, then now you're falling back in the traditional side. So that's the day when you can figure out which side you're on.
That's a really good point. No, really good point. Yeah.
And as much, you hear a lot of talk about, the mental health side of things and taking time, whatever else, but there is a very fine line between using that as an excuse to not do something and taking what's needed. So knowing what that time and having being someone who has gone through that before, there is a very fine line between not pushing or using it as a reason. And I think there's still, we're working on the create awareness aspect of that health aspect. The next one is creating what are those, and it's going to be different for everybody. And that's what's hard to set anything definite at this point in time. But you can you'll see it with those that it's easy to be in the relaxed mode, wintertime mode. If we're not cropping, we're not as busy, and to say, oh, well, I was busy all summer, I'm going to take all the time now. And there really is still a balance.
No, you're absolutely right. It's interesting. Neil's typed in the word discipline in the chat. I don't know if you saw that or not, but that's really what it's about. It's about, taking the time to be disciplined in your approach. I just threw this up, but this is again from that survey and the results of that survey that was done earlier. And it talks about, lower wages, creating labor gaps, which is creating loss of sales, which is increasing your expenses, which is lowering your farm profits. Therefore, you can't reinvest. And so there's kind of this little bit of a cycle. And so when we think about that and we ask, hey, what are you doing about that? The two jumped up the most were the increased productivity in your existing workforce. How do you do that? And the whole idea of investing in new technology. And so if you think about the way that this works is increase your productivity allows you to lower your labor costs or to at least increase your profits, which allows you to offer maybe better benefits and increases for labor workers and or create more jobs, which should allow you to invest in new technology, which again should make your operation more effective, more efficient, and grow the business. So therefore you can kind of create that cycle. And that's what lean and continuous improvement does for you. So the difference, let me just talk a little bit about what lean is and what Six Sigma is. Some of you, Chelsea's never heard of it. Some of you are somewhat have heard of it. So let me just kind of put it out in simple terms. So lean, when I was trained back in the early 2000s, believe it or not, the lean and Six Sigma was seen as two very different methodologies. Lean came through the Toyota after World War II. They had very minimal minimal access to materials and supplies, they had to think differently. And so they created this, what we call just-in-time management, inventory management. And so lean was born out of eliminating waste. How do we make our processes as efficient as possible with the least amount of anything that's going to add to the cost? That be from labor, that'll be from parts and supplies and materials and so on. So lean was kind of born out of that way. And if you know anything about, Toyota, right? And the whole idea is Toyota was seen as a lean company, and they really, Jeff Liker and authors, famous American authors, wrote books about the Toyota and Toyota Way, they called it, about how they managed their plants and operations, totally different than North America. And as a result of that, they were able to reduce their labor costs and increase their throughput, 3, 4 times, sometimes 5-fold over what the North America was doing. Then back in the about the same period of time, Six Sigma was coming in. So Motorola was developing cell phones and doing all the stuff that they were doing. And Motorola started to measure quality. They started to measure what they call capable and stable processes. And so capable meant that they were able to meet the customer's expectations, and stable meant they were able to do that over a long period of time. And the way that they were doing that is they were managing what they called variation. And so if you think about variation in your industries, how do you measure variation? What does variation look like? Is variation measured in yield? Is variation measured in, samples, soil samples? And you say, hey, this has got so much, one particular nutrient over another. Like, how do you measure variation in your process? Because the more you can manage variation, the more you can predict the output. And that's the way Motorola brought it together. So let me just pause for a second there. What do you think about those two concepts of kind of measuring variation and managing variation and or efficiency? Anyone?
I think my head wraps around the lean part a lot easier than the Six Sigma part, and that might just be me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I got a little bit sidetracked there for a minute, but the variation aspect, is certainly in play for probably all of us as farmers when we're looking at nutrient management, and then the yields on the back end too, as you've noted. And there's other pieces in between too that we'd be looking at. But yeah, so it all has to come together, I think.
It does. And that's what Lean Six Sigma does. So in about 2010, the methodology, those who were lean practitioners, which I was, and those who were Six Sigma practitioners, which I was, started to realize that, hey, you can't really do one without the other and still have an effective output, because you could have a really high quality process that just goes on forever and is not lean, right? There's a whole lot of costs associated with quality checks and so on and so forth. Or you could have a really fast and lean process and the variation be so great that you really don't have a great product at the end of the day. So the toolbox kind of came together, and the toolbox came together in what we call Lean Six Sigma. And that's really what that does. So here's what that means in the farm industry. And I'm going to put these slides up. I'm just going to give you a second. I don't need to read them to you. Have a look at the kind of the lean side and the Six Sigma side and tell me how you connect to those. So to any one of those, which do you feel one side outweighs the other side? Or do you feel they're equally balanced? Or do you think, no, I'm more inclined to lean towards lean? What's your thoughts? Now that you see them, I've kind of listed kind of the tools associated with each of the disciplines.
the aspect that comes to mind, I remember I helped set up and I guess onboard a robotic weeder for lettuce, but it can be used for multiple crops. But one of the things, doing it, replacing manual hand labor, weeding the lettuce to now being automated, and where the increase productivity because it eliminates the labor component, but at the same time it also a couple things happen. One, we could have an accurate count of what lettuce heads there was by the time you're done the row, because it counts as it's going and weeding along. One of the disadvantages is we found out that our inputs, our planting equipment, had to be a little more accurate because it would, I'm going to say, unweed that lettuce plant that was offset from the row. At the same time, it did also improve your quality and consistency on the product, because now you didn't have an extra plant pulling fertilizer out of the soil that was, adjacent. So you're getting a more consistent product because of, more evenly. So, as I go through that, there's some components of both that fall into that.
Yeah.
But it was, one of the first initial reactions by, I'm going to say, one of the older managers was, oh, we're losing lettuce heads, right?
Right.
And because it's kicking out those lettuce heads that weren't in the row. And so that was true. Now we all of a sudden, eliminated, I don't know how many, I can't remember now how many employees would have to hand rake those, but that was a sacrifice to now a better, even product quality.
Right. And so I love it. That's an amazing example of where both come together, right? Both Lean and Six Sigma come together really, really well in that example, Nicholas, and thanks for sharing it, because you're absolutely right. And it's really interesting. I'm pardon my ignorance, my wife would be able to tell me, is lettuce is you buy lettuce by weight, I would assume. Yes. Am I right? Or is it just like a head of lettuce has
It's by a head, but Alan might
By the
know.
head. By the head, typically. Yeah.
It is by the head. Okay. Right. So, but the consistency in the delivery of the size of the product and obviously an automated weeding thing would allow for that very consistent looking crop would have its benefits as well. So, whether it's the number of heads or whether it's the quality of the heads, there's this kind of blend there, and I'll defer to Alan on that.
Just the having the head count is very important, because you can look at the field and see, you see all the rows and you have an idea how many heads how many were planted, right? But to actually have the count and know what it is, and then you would have the ones that die out for whatever reason, and you have that accurate count every time you run through the crop, and so you're able to give your predictions on your sales team a lot better. We're gonna have so many heads ready week 36 or week 40, and you can have that accurate count. So when you start stepping back and looking at the efficiencies of fertilizer and labor, and even though I'm going to say we were losing some heads in the process, I think what we gained on all those other aspects outweighed that. But it's one of those ones that feels funny at the time when you're in a market where every lettuce head is actually what makes you your money. Well, it's kind of reversing that psychology, and a lot like the dairy cows, right? For 20 years or more, milk one more cow, make more money. But now it's when I taught at the college, it was milk one less cow, make the same amount of milk, make more money. Because feeding that cow, there's a certain amount of energy that has to go into maintenance of the animal. So you don't make any money on that maintenance. You make it on what it's doing for production. So
no, love it. I think it's great. It's really, we're going to take a break here in a second, but again, if you've been watching me on LinkedIn, I bought a book just the other week called The Lean Dairy Farm. And Jana, it's pronounced Jana. I've been calling her Jana, but it's Jana Hawken. She's in New Zealand, and she runs she worked for a number of years for Toyota, and she married a dairy farmer, and then she took her learnings from Toyota and took it to her farm, and I've been reading through that and have a lot of really interesting learnings from that, and a lot of it goes to exactly what you just said there, Nicholas, that, this isn't necessarily about, how many cows you can put through. It's about what each cow produces and how do you get the maximum from that. So very cool. Very cool. Any other comments from anybody before I flip off this page? All right, I'll tell you what I'd like to do. Let's take a bit of a break. Let's take a 10-minute stretch break. Again, I know that you guys probably have other things to get doing. And so maybe it'll give you a chance to do whatever it is, make a call or do whatever you need to do. Let's just take a quick 10-minute stretch break. And then when we'll come back, we'll pick it up about how you can increase productivity as it relates to your farm. And whether you don't have any employees at Chelsea, whether you're a sole, proprietor, or whether you're like Alan with, a seasonal workforce that, tops 40 plus people, I think you're going to find some of this information insightful. So 10 minutes, we'll come back. Everybody good? Okay, 11% of your bees you've lost over the winter.
Yep. So the national average is 20. So
Okay.
you can come back from those losses, but I've heard some guys as high as 90%. So that's a little tougher one to come back from, especially with the high. We can get packages in from New Zealand, but there's less flights and more costly, and so those packages have gone up. Well, they're 50% more expensive than 5 years ago.
Wow.
So,
Yikes. Anyways.
and they're not available. That's the other half. So even if you're willing to pay the price, you just can't get the volume you might need.
I understand. Challenges. So I guess that means you got to get the old adage, you got to make honey while you can, plays true. So that's we're going to pick up where we left off, and I really appreciate you guys' engagement in the discussion, and hopefully you're finding this of some value. So let's talk about productivity as it relates to your farm, and how you can utilize it. I'm going to share with you some tools and thinking that you might be able to adopt, and certainly as you think about the next tier levels that Caitlin expressed to you, if you think that, hey, you'd like to apply for that, these are some of the things that you might want to think about as we go forward. And that is, I want you to start to think about value added and non-value added and value enabling type activities. So start looking at everything that you do on your farm with those three lenses. What's adding value? What do I have to do in order to able to add value? And what are those things that I'm doing that nobody would probably want to pay me for, period. And so if we start to look at those things and explore those things, that's where we really find the biggest opportunities. I want to talk about enhancing problem solving. So I think farmers, this was interesting. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody in the industry, and we were talking about problem solving, and they said, farmers are by nature problem solvers. They get a problem, they fix it, they may not go through any methodology about, getting the root cause analysis, but you can be sure that if they have a problem with something, that by the end of the day or the end of the week, that's been fixed, and they'll be able to continue on business. I want to talk a little bit about problem solving and how you currently do it and how you might be able to do it with some different tools. I want to talk about lean maintenance, what that means. Standardizing work and the importance of standardizing work. And Alan, I think, for any organization that has a workforce, and especially a temporary workforce, having work standards and standardizing work is going to be essential to the quality of your product and engaging and understanding that. Do you guys use any standard work now in your industry, in your farm?
In terms of documented standards, or I mean, a lot of our processes are very much standardized at this point. The recurring type field work that most of the workers would be doing. I think our bigger challenge is trying to get certain individuals to another level where they can kind of do the more customized processes and roles on the farm that are are not in the mainstream, I'll say.
Okay, so we can talk a little bit about that and those and the opportunities that might present themselves around that. And then I want to talk about metrics and how you're using metrics and what metrics are you using and how might you do that a little differently. I mentioned before the break, I mentioned about this book, the Lean Dairy Farm. And you don't have to be in dairy to appreciate the value of this book. I think it's you could be in any industry, but certainly she brings it home from a farming perspective. She actually has a website. I'm just going to share it with you. It's called leanfarm.nz for New Zealand. And so she has a website, and on that website, she has a number of videos. I'm going to show you a couple of those videos. And so you can see that she's got, I guess, about 13 or 14 videos here. She started what is called the 3-minute Lean Farm series, but it appears that she didn't get beyond the 13 videos. So she may have abandoned it or gotten on to doing some other things. But the ones that she's got here are all very short videos, and they're really quite good. And so I will reference a couple of those here today. So we'll get into that as well. Actually, while I'm here, I want to show you this first one. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to hear this.
Hi, I'm Jana Hocken, author
Can you hear that? Did you hear that? You did. Okay. All right.
of The Lean Dairy Farm. I've had loads of requests from all over the world to try and do some sort of YouTube short videos to show farmers around the world how we're applying lean management tools and philosophy on our farm. So I'm going to start this 3-minute Lean Farm video series, and hopefully they will help you to apply the same sort of thinking and tools on your farms and help your farming businesses. If there's any requests of anything specific that you want to see, please get in touch over the website, and I'd be happy to try and do a video of that specific thing. I hope you enjoy this video series and hope that it helps you to become lean on your farm.
So I only showed you that particular one because, first of all, I want you to know that, lean on farming is not uncommon. It's been done and it's being done, and you can see by her example that she's actually traveled throughout Europe giving seminars similar to what we're doing with you folks across the world, the other side of the ocean. I've actually tried to connect with her through her website, so I'm hoping at some point she'll respond and we can have a bit of an engagement, because I'd love to tap into her knowledge and experience. But she talks about metrics, and I wanted to show that to you a little bit later. Let me ask you this, and who are your customers? Who do you see as your customers?
People eating our food at the end of the day.
Oh, okay. So people eating your food at the end of the day. Okay. Thanks, Alan. Anybody else?
And certainly, I mean, I say that loosely because it's the folks in the middle, the retailers that are ultimately the ones we're dealing with, but we have to satisfy the needs of their customers. So.
Right. Okay. So you have customers who have customers and you're servicing them. So that, I get that. Okay. Anybody else?
For us, Gary, it's our immediate local community.
Okay. So those that are directly inside of your community. So it's really interesting. I had this discussion again, as I said, with somebody in the industry yesterday, and we were talking a little bit about focusing on the customer, because at Lean Six Sigma, these 3 characteristics are usually first and foremost. We think about, hey, what is it the customer values? What is it the customer needs and wants, right? And so when you think about it, your customers actually are pretty broad, as you said. They can be your next door neighbor who you're selling product to, or they could be a mass retailer like a Costco or a Loblaws or Sobeys or some other big organization that you're selling to. Some of those probably internationally too. Chances are your product isn't all staying local. Some of it's going throughout Canada. Some of it's going into other parts of the world. And so kind of thinking about who your customers are is really a bit of a challenge. Here's what I'm going to propose. and I think you kind of hit on it there, Alan, is really that your customer is the next person in the step of the process of you getting your product to where it's going to go, is the end of the day. So for to your point about it being, you know, a retailer, or it could be a wholesaler, or it could be an organization who's, you know, who's acting on behalf of somebody else. So understanding, you know, the buying public or the person who's consuming your product it becomes really important, because that's how you're going to define value. You're going to define value through their eyes. And at the end of the day, if you were to if you would have the breakdown on a lettuce tag that said, you know, this is the price of the lettuce, and, you know, 10 cents of that price is for this, 15% of that price is for that, 20% of the price is for this, and you would have a breakdown as to say it all that, what is it that the consumer is going to want to pay for? And you say, you know, well, wait a minute, what do you mean? I'm paying, you know, 15 cents for you to drive it from point A to point B, or I'm paying for the repair on the tractor, right? So there's things that if you would actually break down what it actually took to produce the product, that your paying person would say, what am I paying for that for? Right? They're saying, hey, I get it. You got to plant it. I get it. You got to put nutrients on it and water it. I get it that you got to take it out of the ground. And I get it that you've got to get it to the store or the place where I can buy it. And if that's the end of the road, or the farmer's market, or the grocery store, or the wholesaler, I get it. You've got to get it there. But beyond that, that's all I'm really feel I should pay for. And that's true of any product, right? How many times have you received a product and you've opened up the packaging and you can't even get it out of the package because you're frustrated, and you're thinking to yourself, you know, I paid for this product and I don't care about the packaging. Let me get the, I want to be able to use the product. The package it came in doesn't mean anything to me, but you're inadvertently paying for that packaging. And so if we start to think about what is the customer values, we can start to examine what we do, why we do it, and how we do that. Evidence-based decision-making is really about using your information. I told you I did some work with Maplewood Farms, and when we used data, we looked at their data that they were collecting. They were collecting it as part of a regulatory component. They were required to collect this information, but they weren't using or didn't know how to use that information to effectively help them make decisions. And I'm going to show you how we kind of help them with that. And also Eden Valley was providing feedback to them on product that they were receiving. So birds were not going to market. And so we understood why. We started to understand, well, why aren't the birds, why the birds being condemned and not going to market? And so we started to do some analysis on that. So I'll share that with you. But it was about using data in a different way than they currently use it. And of course, it's all about trying to ensure you improve the quality of your product at the lowest possible cost, and getting it to where it needs to go as effectively and efficiently as possible. So that's the three kind of outputs that come from driving a lean continuous improvement type project. And we use a methodology called DMAIC, and it's an abbreviation, stands for define, measure, analyze, improve, control. And I'm going to go through these steps really kind of quickly to kind of just give you a flavor, but then I'm going to zero in on some very specific tools with some of these steps that, you know, that if you don't take anything else away, you could take those away and feel like you've got something you can use. Normally, when we use this methodology, we start with define, and that really is, we start to say to ourselves, okay, what's the impact of the problem? So when you have a problem on your farm and you say, hey, what's the impact of that problem? It helps you to determine how much effort you're going to want to put into fixing it. And so to Chelsea's point, you kind of sometimes have to think about, it may not be a problem today, but it could be a problem down the road. So what's the impact of that problem? How long has it been going on? Right? I talked about special cause versus common cause. If a problem only happens once in 2 or 3 years, you're going to react a lot differently than if it happens every season or every week. And so how long has the problem been going on, and how often does it occur? And then, you know, where on your farm does it occur? Is this a problem in the field? Is this a problem in the barn? Is this a problem in, you know, in production, in transportation? Like, where in your process is that problem? So that's kind of what we do in the define phase. And you can do that in minutes, or you can do that over an extended period of time, because sometimes you don't know the answer. You don't know how long it's been going on. You know what? I think it's been going on for a couple of months, or geez, I'm pretty sure this is like the 4th time this has happened. Well, if you're not recording it, you don't know the answer to that. So you might say, you know what? I'm going to start recording this problem, and I'm going to see how often it happens. I'm going to measure the impact of that problem. And so we'll go into that. The measure phase is just about that. It's about validating things. It's about really determining, how bad is it? When something happens, how bad is it? What's it costing me, right? And how long how are we doing currently? Baselining. So when you talk about yield, you talk about, you know, percentage of yield as it relates to, or number of kilograms of a product produced, or however you're measuring your things. You kind of want to say is, this is what I expect, this is what I've got, and there's a gap between what I need and where I am, between what I want and where I'm at. And so when you can identify what the gap is, then you can start to identify the value of that gap. When you understand the value of the gap, you can determine how much time and effort and energy it's worth for you to get the benefits of that. And then finally, it's kind of like, what's critical? That whole idea of, you know, when I told you to get to work on time, getting up on time, and leaving on time, those are 2 critical factors in getting to work on time. In the measure phase of this, we start to look at what's critical. What is it that are going to be the biggest predictors of your success? And if we can identify what those are, we can monitor those, we can have a better production of the output. And that's what measure phase does. In the analyze phase, we start to use that information and we start to dig deep. We start to look a lot deeper. What's the root cause of the problem? And I'm going to show you a tool. And then where should we focus to maximize the return on the investments? So Dave, I see your mic is open. Did you have a question or comment?
No, I don't. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Yes, I just saw that you were open. I could hear you in the background. I wasn't sure
Sorry.
if you had a question. That's okay. Where should we focus and maximize our effort? That's a key component of the analyze phase. We talk about getting to root cause. And so when you solve problems on your farm now, are you addressing root cause, or are you creating the equivalent of a Band-Aid solution? It's going to get you through the day. It's going to get you through the week, might even get you through the season. But is it really addressing the root cause of the problem? And so in the analysis phase, we dig down to root cause. And then the improve phase, it is all about understanding what your options are. What is it that we can do? Where do we get the best ideas? How do we gather those best ideas? How do we incorporate those best ideas? What's going to give me the biggest impact for the least amount of effort? Because that's really what you want. You don't want to be spending big effort for low impact. So what is it that's going to get me my results? And then how do I plan to make that happen? So that's kind of what we do in the improve phase. And then the control phase is making sure that you don't slip back to the old way of doing things. What are you going to do to ensure you've created this new future state that is going to give you improvements? How do you ensure you don't slip back and make sure you continue to move forward? And it's really a big challenge because, and I've seen this, well, I'm going to say dozens, probably more than dozens of times, where an organization will put in a process improvement. And because of the change management of implementing a new process, things actually get a little worse instead of getting better at first. because it's a new way of doing things and people aren't used to it. So they're a little slower and they're thinking, and so as soon as they start to see the decline, their instant response is, "Oh, we got to stop. Let's go back to the way it was. Hey, it was better before." And rather than saying, hey, we've got to work through this new process until we level it out. And when we level it, it's like it's like your stock market right now. I don't know if anybody's got any investments, but the stock market's going down like this. And so your investments are going down. At some point, you got to say, hey, this is going to turn around. And you say, hey, I'm in this for the long haul. And I know that if I stick this out, if I continue to do what I'm doing and know that it's good for me, it's going to turn around and I'm going to actually do better. And we're all hoping that's going to happen with the stock market right now. But anyway, that's kind of how we think. We have to think about, hey, when I get into a change, and I know based on all of the work I've done before, it's the right thing to do because it's going to get me the results I want. We have to trust that. And if performance starts to decline a little bit, we need to say, hey, I need to manage through that. The last thing I need to do is cut it off and go back to the way it was, because then you've lost all that time, effort, and energy. So that's what the control phase is. So we're going to go a little bit deeper into this in just a second. I'm very specific tools. I'm not going to go through the whole methodology, but that's kind of the methodology in a whole. So Chelsea, you had no idea what it was before. Do you have a vague idea now?
I definitely have a much better idea. And honestly, what you're doing is putting words and processes into my mind for the things that we were kind of already starting to do or had
Absolutely
already
true.
had in place. But like I said, you're just kind of defining it now. So it's making it easier to move forward with those same processes.
And that is exactly it. I hate to say that I got I'm certified in common sense, but that's unfortunately what Lean Six Sigma kind of is. It's kind of it's like taking things that well, that makes common sense. Well, geez, that's nothing revolutionary about that. Well, the truth is not much revolutionary about a lot of what I kind of bring to an organization. I shouldn't really say that. There is some, but for the most part, people will go, I was kind of doing that, and you put a name to it. So yeah, so there is a lot to do that. There's a lot of stuff that we bring to the table, new tools that will help and enable you. And I'm going to get into a couple of those right now, as I call them the essential toolbox. So in the Lean Six Sigma toolbox, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff, just to give you a vague idea. So when I was Lean certified, I took 5 weeks of technical training. I had to complete 2 projects that saved my organization $250,000 each. I had to pass an exam that took me 12 hours to complete before I was certified as a Lean black belt. I had to repeat that for Six Sigma black belt. And then as a master black belt, I had to do even more. I had to help deploy stuff and so on. So the toolbox is like huge. But I've learned when I'm working with organizations, there are a few tools that I've used in almost every single project that I've ever supported. And my team and I would say the same thing. So those are the tools I'm kind of bringing to you right now. And the first one is understanding value from the customer's perspective. Looking at what you do and how you do it in the way of, does this add value or does this not add value? And here's what I learned yesterday too, actually, in talking to, actually it wasn't yesterday, it was when I was talking to the stakeholders, when Caitlin and I were talking with some of the other stakeholders presenting this. And that is the idea of value added. How do you'll see my definition that I've typed out here. Is that a definition of value added you kind of understand and connect to?
Yeah, I would agree with that, I think.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. Chelsea?
Reading through that, the value added or the necessary steps in the process is kind of something that's new to me in this sense, only because my previous background I was a sales manager for a decade. Value added services are the little tiny features and things that I can sell a person on at the register, like those point of sale pack of gums, those value added services. That's the
Right.
traditional side of it that I'm used to. But
Exactly.
this makes absolute sense as well. It's value added when you take those tiny extra steps to transform the product before it even makes it to the customer.
And that's what I wanted to talk about, because I was with you for, like I said, I looked after retail for all the 35 post offices along the south shore of Nova Scotia, and we actually had a model called SERVE. And so it was smile, explore, right, right solution, value add, encourage them to return. And so we would teach our frontline people this whole idea of serve, right? You had to kind of, and so when we had mystery shoppers come in, it was all about that. And the value added piece was always about, hey, what else did you get a book of stamps today? Do you need a book of stamps? Who was the last time you bought a book of stamps? But anyway, do you need a book of stamps? That was kind of the value added question, or, something like that. That's not the value add that we have today, as I see it here and learned after. The value add work is what we do to transform the product to what the customer wants. And what we want to do, and this is really difficult, because I would suggest that most of you are really good at identifying the value added work. What we don't have a tendency to do is focus on eliminating the non-value added work. Let me kind of give you an example. And Alan, I'm going to kind of pick on you for a minute here, because not that I know anything about your industry, but I'm thinking about the lettuce, and then I'm thinking about what Nicholas said about the lettuce, weeder and stuff. I don't know. Do you have automated weeding equipment?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, so if we think about it, right? Okay, value add is putting the seeds in the ground, fertilizing them, taking it out of the ground when it's ready. That would be 3 really easy value added things. If I were to ask you what adds value, you would instantly probably tell me those 3 things, right? And so what we do is we think, how do I do those 3 things better, faster, more effective? Because that's what we see. We see the value added and we go, if I can make that better, that's got to make my whole process and things better. What we don't see is the non-value added stuff, the distance that the automated vehicle or whatever it is that's doing the weeding or the planting and so on, the distance that it had to travel, the preventive maintenance component that was required for that piece of equipment in order to make it effective and efficient. If you've got a thing that's got cameras, cleaning the lenses, before you actually do that, otherwise you're going to be pulling out the wrong things or whatever. But we don't focus on the non-value added stuff we should be eliminating. We focus on the value added stuff because we recognize what that is. But our biggest opportunity is in eliminating or reducing the non-value added stuff. This isn't to say that we don't continue with focusing on the value add, but our biggest benefit in a process improvement comes from eliminating the non-value added stuff. And so we need to think what that is. And that really is that middle block, right? That walking around, the searching for tools, and again, I've just picked a few things out that came to my mind, but I'm going to get you guys to think about more in just a minute. And then you have this necessary stuff. We call it value enabling. These are things that you need to do in order to be able to add value. So, checking the weather forecast to make sure that, hey, you know what, if it's going to be a frost warning tonight, I got to do something about that. That's value add in a way that it's value enabling. If I don't do that, I'm not going to have a value added product at the end of the day. Things like record keeping for regulatory purposes. I know in some industries, and I don't know if it's true in the produce industry, you can tell me, do you have to have traceability?
Yeah, absolutely. At least at our level, there depending on what your degree of where you're selling to and stuff, but definitely in our world we do.
Right. So in the event of a recall, there has to be this traceability back to the source. And so, that is something that, if you imagine if you were picking up a head of lettuce and it said, hey, we're going to charge you 13 cents for traceability. right? Like, it just doesn't make sense. But you got to do it. If you don't do that, you can't provide the added value piece. So the value enabling needs to be identified as well. And you obviously want to become as proficient in the value enabling piece as you possibly can too. And so, so I'm going to get you guys to kind of think about those three kind of areas. And here's how I want you to think about it. We use this acronym called Tim Woods. And so Tim Woods, you can actually rearrange this. And if you change the S from skills to excess skills, or you could create the acronym downtime. Sometimes I use downtime, like Tim Woods, makes it easy. So Tim Woods is kind of a recognized acronym. If you Google, lean Tim Woods, this is what you would get. And it talks about transportation. So anytime you're moving stuff around, not potentially, it's non-value added. Inventory. Every time you have a buildup of inventory, a product and or components, that can be non-value added. Inventory actually hides the defects. Because if you were to produce something and you were produce it and there was to be a defect in it for some reason, and you have this inventory of it, now you've got a hidden defect. And if you discover that defect in a big inventory, you've now discarded the whole bunch. Whereas if you have a little amount of inventory and discover that there's a problem with it, your defects go down. So inventory hides defects. Motion is probably one of the biggest areas, maybe next to transportation, that I feel there is potential in farming, is how much motion happens in your industry. That's talking about movement. When I talk about motion, I talk about the individuals, the people doing the work. When I talk about transportation, I talk about the moving of the product around. Waiting, a lot of waiting. Maybe you're waiting, and I'm going to get you guys to do a bit of an exercise, so I'm not going to say what's on my mind. Over processing is simply doing more than is necessary with a particular product. And we'll talk about what that is. Overproduction is producing more than the next step needs. And again, I think this is another potential opportunity. And remember, I talked about machinery, automation. Automation can very easily overproduce to the point that you create inventory. Inventory hides defects. So if you had a piece of machinery that was producing something at a rapid speed, and it's creating an inventory, and you haven't managed that inventory quickly, and there's a problem with it, suddenly you've got a whole lot that's got a problem and not a little. And so overproduction creates inventory. Inventory hides defects. So those three are really tightly connected. And then finally, there's skills. And again, I talk about employees who come to work with a mind as well as hands. And so how do you tap into that? Or underskilled. You've got a new hire and you don't train them effectively, and they go out and they make mistakes. That could be both detrimental to your product. It could be detrimental to their health. So skills would be another waste. Here's some of the words that I've learned over the course of my career and working with my teams that we will hear when we ask people to describe the work they do. So if I said to you, hey, what do you do and how do you do it? I start listening for these words, because when I hear you using these words to describe what you do, it's a potential for waste. It's a potential opportunity to save time, save money, save effort, which turns out to be money in the end, right? And so I'm listening for these words. So I'm going to leave this slide up, and because it's such a small group. If this had been a bigger group, I would have broken you out into groups. But because it's such a small group, I'm going to keep us all together here. And I'd like you guys to talk about your industry, your work, and tell me which of these words resonate most with you as it relates to opportunity for identifying waste.
I can start if
Great.
that works.
Yeah.
I'd say the biggest one, and you kind of highlighted on the last slide for us, is motion. When you've got the number of workers that we have and the processes, the very much body motion gauge processes that they do, anything that can be cut down on by X percentage is a benefit, can be a fairly significant benefit. So that would be a big one for us in terms of the labor aspect. There was another one here, the moving, not necessarily the transportation, but the moving within the warehouse and the inventory management. And it goes back to the inventory, I guess, as well, but shifting that around to keep it queued up and things is can be a time waster within our cold storage and things like that as well. So that's I mean, it's probably not a big one, but it could be significant, I guess, depending on how you analyze it.
Yeah,
yeah.
if it turns into that product either ends up getting spoiled, or the expiry, or it's running out of date, I'm sure there's a huge cost associated with kind of inventory that has a certain shelf life, and suddenly you're reaching the end of that shelf life.
That's right, and that ties so that overproduction, that inventory, they tie together, and that vegetables being at the mercy of nature. Sometimes you'll have yields that ebb and flow, and your customer side doesn't absorb that as readily as you'd hope. So certainly we run into that every season, where all of a sudden our cold storage is full for a week, and it gets cumbersome to manage that. But yeah, I mean, all these, I could speak to all these topics, find issues with all of them, but yeah.
Which is, in a way, it's good, because you're recognizing the opportunity, Alan. When you see that, you go, okay, now I need to figure out how I address it. But you recognize it as an opportunity, and so you can kind of live with it season to season, or you can say, you know what, this season is going to be a little different. I'm going to manage that inventory a little bit differently. I'm going to do a little less movement with it. I'm going to create some sort of system that allows this kind of an easier access to flow. So I have more of a FIFO type, first in, first out system that is easier manageable than having to move product around to keep it in a FIFO format or whatever. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Anybody else? Chelsea, you're fairly new to that role, but do you see any of these resonate with you?
Right. To give you a little bit of background, we bought the farm that we're at back in December, and they had been in production the last couple of years and normally started greenhouse production in January. At that time, we were living in British Columbia, and we only got back in March. So right now, the waiting side is like kind of what we're feeling right now, as a way. It almost feels wasteful, because there are days where we've planted in as much greenhouse space as we have. We're working to amend some of the soil, so some of it isn't usable. So now it's a matter of just trying to find different tasks that we can maximize our time there while we wait for things to grow. And that's what right now, that's kind of what feels the most, I guess, wasteful for what we're working with. We don't have, the two of us, it's just myself and my partner. We don't have any staff. So we go every day, we work, but it's the standby, the holding pattern while you wait to see what comes out of the ground and how healthy it comes out of the ground, whether or not it's viable to continue with, to continue giving the nutrients and all that time and effort and labor to grow that specific vegetable or plant, or should we move on to the next one? And so we're getting a feel for all of it now, that's for sure.
Right. So yeah, so you're in a really somewhat of a great opportunity to think about, to your point, you've got time to be proactively thinking about, okay, what's the rest of the season going to look like, and how are we going to optimize it. So so often, we work with businesses, and I would say this industry is no different, that they're forever firefighting. It's every day is, I got to get through the day, and I got to get through this week, and I got to get through this period, and so on. That they, the whole idea of pausing to sharpen the saw is just not something that they have the luxury of being able to do. So you have to think about how do I edge these people into this space? You have to have that because
Yep.
you know, anybody ever heard of Stephen Covey? Do anyone, when I say Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Ever? So Alan's nodding his head. So the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he wrote in that book, and habit number 7 is sharpen the saw. Habit number 1 is be proactive. And so he talks about, and he uses the analogy of a lumberjack who's cutting trees down, right? And he's saying, that the lumberjack is paid by every tree that they cut. And so as he's cutting down the tree, somebody comes along and says, hey, why don't you just take a minute and sharpen your saw? And he says, no, I've got too many trees to cut down. And so, it's kind of like, really, but that's kind of what we do in our own lives. We are so busy cutting trees that we don't stop to say, hey, if I sharpen the saw, I'm going to be able to cut trees better, faster, more effectively. And so he challenges us to think about that in the work that we do. There's this, and Chelsea, you're kind of here right now, which is really kind of powerful place, right? There's this point between stimulus and response that is really powerful for us to be able to tap into. So the stimulus is an event that happens, whatever that event is. And our response to that stimulus, that event, is can be instant, or we can pause and think, okay, how am I going to respond right now? What's my next step going to be? How am I going to do this next? That's a really powerful place to be. And when you're in the midst of fighting fires, if you don't have an auto response system that allows you to proactively use that decision-making point effectively, you can get yourself caught into a loop that you just find very challenged to get out of. But if you can pause and then respond, you can respond so much more effectively. And that's kind of where you're at, Chelsea, right now, you're in this ability to be able to pause and say, okay, what's the rest of the season going to look like? And that's a great place to be able to find yourself, because not everybody can find themselves there. So.
It's been a time of evaluation. We've taken the previous owner's processes and looked everything over, and considering we are behind in our grow schedule compared to what we would prefer to have for ongoing years forward, we're doing exactly that. We're just kind of taking a step back and looking at what's been going on, those errors or deficiencies that have been happening, and really evaluating whether or not the time and effort being put into them year 1, season 1, day 1 is worth it, or is that something that we can kind of hold on to for a little bit and complete later on.
So Nicholas has gone off camera, so I'm assuming, Nicholas, you're probably having to take care of some other business while you do that, because you said you were on call. But if you're able to weigh in, please feel free to do that. It'd be awesome. And well, for you, Niels, you're still probably spreading the manure. Hopefully, that's not what you think I'm doing here. I just. Anyway, so hopefully what I'm spreading is good fertilizer. Let's put it that way. So if you have a chance to weigh in, please do that. But otherwise, thanks. Alan, you're anything else coming to mind here after you kind of heard Chelsea that you want to highlight? Niels is gonna pipe in. That's great. Go ahead, Niels.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm half in and out here. I don't know. I'm just listening in. I don't really have a whole lot to say, really, but just want to let you know I'm here, I guess.
No, I appreciate that. No, it's great. No, good. I hope things are going
Thing is,
well.
I have it on Bluetooth, so it's kind of hard to talk and come in and out with the Zoom and all that. So yeah.
No, totally understand, but I really appreciate the fact that you've tuned in, and hopefully what you're hearing is resonating with you.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're mostly dairy. We have like cash crops as well. We're down in Apples Valley, so I don't know, some stuff with customers and stuff for supply managed is a little different I guess, and how we have to market our stuff, but I think it's all relevant and we deal with employees and all that. So I guess I'll just listen along and see what I can pull out of this.
Great.
I'll try to give you some input when I can, but hard to run the phone and do it all at the same time.
Totally understand. No, but thank you. And thank you for just chiming in there. Appreciate it very much. So, yeah. The good news is Caitlin's recording this, so I don't know how she's going to use that recording after, but certainly it's an opportunity for you to think about that. And then we do have other events coming up too. So there's a chance to do that. So, but thank you again.
I was just going to chime in quick. I mean, Chelsea made a good point on the taking time to really think through the processes and such. And a lot of times as farmers, and maybe Niels will disagree with me on this one, but a lot of times as farmers, there's seasonality involved, and you do have that downtime to really. I think farmers need to take more time and reflect on the year past or the season past, and where they can improve and go forward. But yeah. And I think we do that. I think a lot of farmers do that. I mean, looking at your last slide, like I can think of lots of situations where we started with a process maybe 5 years ago, or a crop, let's say, that we had took on and from another farm, and we've completely changed that process up and streamlined it. So yeah, but there's always lots of opportunity. When I look at that slide, I see opportunity in every single section. So
That's great. Good. No, I'm glad to hear that. And I'm hopefully it's given you something to kind of think, how do I maximize on that? Because we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So this is an activity that we just kind of did. I asked you guys about the value added, non-value added, and so on. Does anything that you do, that you feel is value enabling that you could do better? Anything jump out at you in that regard? I mean, I'm talking about record keeping and, potentially things like that.
I mean, we definitely can. Everything from like a lot of our record keeping we have to follow a food safety protocol, and there's an audit process and everything there, but that's all on paper for us still, generally speaking, from what for the most part. So streamlining that and getting that into an electronic form that maybe you can pick up your phone and enter it, versus having it on a notepad and then transitioning it over to a checklist later on and such. So there's some of that for sure. And then timekeeping with 45 employees is a very probably, I come from an accounting background too. I'm actually sitting in my accounting firm world right now, but coming from that background, record keeping on a time sheet perspective, and there's lots of efficiencies that could be had for us on that side, I guess, and all that jazz. But yeah.
Yeah, I
always
kind of
room on
got
it.
that from Kim and Joel. Now they're just I say just, they're a family farm. They have themselves and their two boys that run those 3 barns for their birds. But they do kind of 500,000 birds a year through that plant. So through their farm. And they were doing a lot of manual record keeping. So I'm going to show you what we helped them with as far as kind of making that a little bit easier, just using, and if you're an accountant or accounting, then you know how easy Excel can be to use. So we just created an Excel that they can use on a tablet, and it, they were having to double entry everything. And at first they weren't doing anything, and then they just started double entry, and then they actually got more effective. So record administration, I think, is one of those value enabling pieces in it that are part of farming that definitely can find ways to maximize their time and effort. I can't imagine how many hours, and Niels would probably, and Nicholas may as well. And Chelsea, I'm not so sure if administrative work is a big part of what you do, but definitely I could see administrative work is done always kind of like after the farm work has been done, then we got to do the administrative work.
Yeah, and I would add too, like when I look around at a lot of farms in our area that of similar size and scope, I mean, intergenerationally, I see big challenges there, because they may have a mother or father that's still doing the bookkeeping and sitting in the office and running all that, whereas the next generation, the wife or the spouse, the partner, what have you, I should say, partner, maybe out in the other part of the world with an off-farm job. So we as an industry, I think we need to figure out ways to streamline a lot of that what we'll call non-value added process.
And
to
value
survive.
enabling and value enabling. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, Neil says, thank goodness for
Sorry.
mom. Right. So,
Yeah, exactly.
right. Yeah. And that's probably the true, like, and that's the other thing too about farming. It's unlike other industries leaders will come and go. If I find, you know, when I go into to support an organization, if the manager or the director or the president, if they've been there more than 5 to 8, maybe 10 years, that's considered a pretty long tenure. You know, if they get over 10 years, then it's you know, they've been around a while. You know, in the farming industry, you know, Chelsea, you're a rare commodity that, you know, you're in year 1. Whereas, you know, I know the Newcombs, they're like a 4th or 5th, maybe even 6th generation. You know, Cornwallis Farms has been around for decades, and so you kind of realize that the way you do things may not have evolved as quickly as if you had a quick turnover and a new group come in to say, hey, we got to do things a little different. So totally get that. So here's a couple of, this is my cheat list. This is the list that I came up with based on my understanding of some of the work that goes on a farm. You know, transportation, I would say, like, I think this is, Alan, kind of lends itself to kind of what you said about the cold storage room, like moving feed or things about from location to location in order to make room for other stuff, right? Can be something that inventory. I put medication that expires. So for those that are, you know, dairy farms or any of those that have livestock, I'm sure that you have this supply of medication that vets give you that you need to use and have on hand for certain things, right? How much inventory do you have before it becomes obsolete and it's wasted? Motion, walking, driving back and forth, fixing fences twice. Certainly, I would think, you know, to your point about, you know, people using certain equipment, do they have to bend and stretch and move and that kind of thing? Waiting, I went back to the vet thing because it was on my mind when I talked about medication. You know, waiting for supplies, waiting for things to arrive, right? I don't necessarily say waiting for things to grow. Like Chelsea, you talked about waiting for things to grow. I think that's kind of comes with the territory. If you're a farmer, things have got to grow, or things have got to get to a certain, you know, like the Maplewood farm birds have to get a certain weight. You kind of have to make that happen, wait for that to happen. But there are other things, especially during the AI, the avian influenza, the bird flu, that caused a whole lot of waiting for any of the poultry producers. They literally had to do everything as it related to nothing could come and go from their farm without CFIA approval, and the waiting on that alone was horrendous in some cases. As efficiently as they were trying to be, it was challenging for some of the farmers. Over processing, this is the one that I really picked up on from Maplewood, was this duplicating of information. They would capture the information in more than one place and on different areas, or they would re-enter it. They'd capture it and they'd re-enter it. And so you think about that. Overproduction, you know, simply having more on hand than you need. That's kind of what cold storage does. And then once you get the capacity, now what? Defects, broken equipment, and then skills, you know, hires thrown into work with minimum things. So this was kind of my cheat list. Yeah. Resonate with you guys? Yeah, Alan's nodding. Thank you. So lean maintenance. So let's talk a little bit about what lean maintenance is. So again, so waste, hopefully I've spent some time on waste, and hopefully waste is one of those areas you've really, hopefully you'll look a little differently about what you do and how you do it. Certainly that's a lean concept, and we would want to explore the opportunities around maximizing that. Lean maintenance really comes to really about kind of like the equipment that's being used. I would say I would suggest on every single farm, whether it's a sole proprietor ownership like Chelsea's up in River John, or whether it's down in the valley, you've got, you know, multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment moving stuff around. this comes to play. Operator maintenance is really things that you put into place that the operator of that equipment must do before they use that equipment. So at Canada Post, we called them circle checks. So we introduced circle checks pretty early in my time. Or actually, I believe circle checks were around when I was basically a letter carrier. They were before my time. They were around forever. But I could not get into my truck, my vehicle, unless I did a circle check. And so what that would mean is I would walk around and make sure the brakes worked. I'd look at the tires. I'd make sure that, that the pressure looked reasonable. I didn't have to take tire pressure, but I was make sure that the tires weren't deflated. Right. I was to look under the hood, make sure that and pull the dipstick out, make sure I could see oil on the dipstick. I should check the wipers and I was to check the headlights. I was to do that at the start of every tour of duty. And so when I gave my truck to the next person, they had to do the same thing. And inside the book, the truck was a log. I had to put the mileage and I had to sign it that I had done the circle check. That was there as a part of a preventive maintenance component. And so when you think about the equipment that you have on your farm and people are going to use that piece of equipment, what's the operator maintenance? What's the operator expected to do before they turn the key or push the fob button or whatever? What is it that they're supposed to do to that piece of equipment before they operate it? And that could be anything from making sure the blades are sharp to, checking the oil. Don't know. But my question to you is, do you have regular routine operator maintenance that says, hey, you don't use this vehicle until you've done these things?
Yeah, so we definitely do, and
Right.
that's partially driven by the to maintain the equipment, but there's also that parameter in our safety protocols as well from a farm safety perspective, and Department of Labor, if they were to come in, they'd ask us, what are you doing before you drive that van away or that tractor away, and prove it to us. So
Excellent. So that's a good lean practice, right? And because it is a preventative maintenance component. So I'm glad to, it's great. I'd love to, if sometime get an example of some of if you're able to share it, Alan, and maybe through Caitlin or whatever, I'd love to get an example, because we are going to be doing some of these in the future, and working with some CI challenges and helping people out. So if we have some examples of good practice, it'd be really great to share some of those if you're willing. Overhauls, definitely, like, again, there's certain equipment that, probably in the off seasons that you're stripping down and building back up from the ground. And I think it's a lot different today than it was probably back in, generations ago, where that, today's technology, sometimes you need a technician more than a mechanic. And so, doing overhauls may not be something that you can do, but certainly overhauls on a regular cycled basis is a good maintenance for considered lean maintenance. Planned maintenance, preventive maintenance, call it what you will. Some call it preventive maintenance, some call it planned maintenance. And again, that's just regular cycles of doing specific tasks. And it sounds like, Alan, you're probably doing all of that now, but sometimes we can neglect doing that, not necessarily you, but sometimes we think in the goal of getting the job done, we don't necessarily always do the preventive maintenance piece. And then, of course, the training and education on equipment and efficiency. So what type of training are you giving, and are you ensuring the sustained component of that? So let me give you an example. We were doing some work with Eden Valley, and we were looking at their trimmers and their operators of how they were using the equipment. And so this particular piece of machinery that was a thigh deboner, and so it would take the bones out of chicken thighs, and so we were looking at that machine, and we were looking at the operator and how often he was cleaning the inside with a hose, hosing it down, in order to ensure that the blades didn't get buildup of fat or skin or something of that nature, ensure the sharpness of the blades. And so when I asked the individual, when was he last trained on that, he would say, well, when I started the job. say, so how long have you been doing, this particular role? Well, I've been doing this role for 5 years. So, okay, you've been doing this role for 5 years. What's the, when were you last certified in the role you're in? And so this was just a generic kind of discussion around the quality of that process. And what we learned was that they got trained once, and QA were certified, we're looking at the work that the output and validating the output. The certification was, they were basically done once. So we suggested that we created what we called an Eye for Quality program. So what happened was that we went in there and we said, okay, let's kind of blind test all of the trimmers and the operator. And once we blind tested them, we'll measure the results and then we'll see what that was. And we learned that it was a lot lower than they thought. So we retrained everybody over the period of 4 weeks, and we rewarded them for the quality of the work they were doing. So we got them from where they were to this new standard. And then we basically certified them. We said, okay, you are now certified at a certain standard. And every year we're going to come back and we're going to recertify you at that standard. And that would ensure the quality of the product. And QA didn't just have to rely on the output. They now knew that they had certified individuals that were basically trained to deliver a certain quality. So it took less, we had way less defects at the end of the day because of that. So when you train someone, and Alan, maybe this is maybe back to you, like when you train somebody on a piece of equipment, is there kind of an annual or semi-annual, is there kind of a cycle of recertification for that equipment, or is it kind of a one-time, we've trained you to use it, so we trust you'll always know how to use it kind of thing?
Yeah, technically it would be an annual process. So we just kind of run back through things and from us, and this is more, I would say, driven by the safety standards and such, but go through the equipment and talk through it and make sure everyone's still current on the process.
Great, excellent. Because that again is it's a twofold thing. It's better for your equipment. It's better for your employees. So it sounds like in your farm you're doing a lot of this, but based on Jana's book, she would say that there's a lot of opportunity here in these areas.
Yeah. Some of it's continuous too. Like you'll have somebody out in the field and you'll just kind of inherently pick up on things that they're doing, maybe doing incorrectly or could be done better, I'll say. So there's some of that too, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's also about the training, right? And so again, what we experienced at other businesses is training is usually given to somebody that's either the most senior person or somebody that the team leader thinks is good at what they do. So they get this job shadow training versus what I would call real training. So if the person isn't doing things quite right, that gets passed on to the trainee. And so you get this diluted evolution of training that, by the time that, maybe that person does what they've been doing for 2 years and you get a new hire and you say, hey, you're going to job shadow so-and-so. Well, so the skill gets diluted throughout the job shadowing kind of component versus, hey, this is the standard. Everybody's going to take this course or this piece and they're going to get certified. And you don't every year we're going to put you through that because it's like me with my motorcycle. I talk about my motorcycle, right? So I take a safety course every few years. You got to, because it's good, even though I took it once wasn't enough. So
yeah, bit of the broken telephone effect.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. The message you hear at the beginning is not the one you get at the end. Yeah, for sure. Here's some things to think about if you haven't already thought about, again, as we think about lean maintenance and so on, would be, buy products that are designed with maintenance in mind. Now, it's a little tougher today. You guys are probably leasing, if you're not buying, you're leasing some pretty expensive equipment, which has some pretty mandatory, probably preventive maintenance kind of components. In some cases, you're probably not even allowed to touch the machine. Somebody else has to be licensed to come in and do that work. But if you're, if you are buying new equipment and there is some preventive maintenance that you're doing, you kind of need to keep in mind how easy that is to do. Do I have to send my mechanic on a course? I know Cornwallis Farms has a full-time maintenance person, for example, right? Do I have to send my maintenance person on courses to be able to fix this or maintain it? Or is it something that, they can read the manual and go at it? So thinking about it in that terms, products that certainly have predictive maintenance, right? Most vehicles today have kind of warnings to you to tell you that things are you've only got so much life left in the oil or on the whatever, and it kind of tells you. Again, intuitively, it's if you can get warned, that's a good thing. Actually knowing the scheduled maintenance, right, and doing that, it's funny. I just took my car right now is at the Honda dealership. It's there, and they told me that, hey, you haven't had a wheel alignment in 20,000 kilometers. You should have that according to the maintenance record. So I have to make the call whether you're going to do that or not. So having a recommended schedule prolongs the life of your vehicle. It's really interesting. I really think about that with my motorbike. Think about it with the car. I don't think, well, no, the wheel hasn't wobbled in a while. It must be good. so yeah, I kind of think about it that way. Built-in autonomous maintenance, and that's that circle check component, that daily autonomous, it's kind of that built-in piece. And then finally, of course, train the staff. And that is really about introducing standard work, which circle checks are a part of standard work. So they kind of go together. Any comments about that slide? No? Okay, cool. And here's kind of how we should work. If you're not doing this, I encourage you to think about doing it. And that is actually, physically document the preventive maintenance on a system somehow. And I'm going to suggest to you it should be a visual system. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that's important. Don't put it on a laptop. Don't put it on a computer. Make it visible somewhere in your operation to say, hey, this equipment needs this maintenance at this time. And you kind of block it out like this and put it on a card, like an index card. And you move that index card to say, hey, that's going to happen this week. And so you start to create this system, visual system that helps you manage yourself through. And if the card is still there, 3 days after it's due to be there, it's a visual signal that you didn't do what needed to be done. Forces you to respond to things like that. So going to get into error proofing. And so I'm just looking at the time. Do we want to take another 5 or 10 minute break? Or are you guys good to keep going? What's your call?
All good to keep going.
Okay, Nicholas, you good? Chelsea, you're good?
I'm good.
Okay, we'll keep on moving. Awesome. Hey, I'll probably get you finished earlier in that case. So error proofing. When we think about error proofing, it's really, this is kind of the protocols as it relates to error proofing. But I want to get this. You can read this slide at a later date. Obviously, the bigger the control, the bigger the problem, bigger the defect, the bigger the control you need in place. And think about that. But here's the way I want you to think about errors. And I use the example of my motorbike drifting outside the center line, right? My car, I just talked about my Honda has this system in it that if I drift from the lane, it auto corrects, brings me back, gives me a warning, right? It brings me back. I mean, today they've actually got the vehicles, my newest car, I can actually, if I wanted to, take my hands off the steering wheel. I mean, it's still a Civic, believe it or not, but that's how advanced they've come, right? They don't prevent you from making, they got error, like collision sensors that it brakes for me automatically if I come up too fast on the car in front. So the first thing you want to do when you think about errors is eliminate them from even being able to happen, right? The machine, my newest car, I can't start it unless I have my foot in the brake. And so that's a error prevention thing. So a young child couldn't get in and start the car, right? 2, I don't get in and start the car and then roll forward because I've got my foot on the brake. So how do we create processes that eliminate the error from even happening. And there's some examples of that today, right? Think about the gas nozzle in a vehicle, right? Hopefully you've never put diesel into a gas engine or gas into a diesel engine. I can tell that Alan that's probably happened once, twice in Navy. I don't know, but the size of the nozzle should prevent the mistake from happening, right? So eliminate the opportunity. Automate it, meaning just so that when certain conditions are met, something happens, right, to prevent it from being catastrophic, right? So again, you think about some of the automated components that when a circuit breaker in your home, when the breaker clicks off to prevent overuse of a circuit, you can go over and you can click it back, but it's automated to stop the problem from getting worse. So we think about what are in our processes can we potentially put in that to make that kind of thing happen. Facilitation is just that standard work in the visual management. And while good, it's visual management is just signage if it doesn't change behavior. So while it's good to have instructions, it's good to have documents posted, they're only as good as the people who look at them and use them. So you think about COVID with the masking, you go into stores today with the arrows that direct you, right? It's good, it's standard work, it's there, it directs you in the right way, and so on. But how many times have we been into the store during the last couple of years and we've seen people walking around without masks and they're walking down the wrong way? You're looking at the arrow as they walk past you and you're going, right? So if the standard work doesn't drive the right behavior, it's really not an effective method, but it is still a method to control behavior. Warnings, talked about warnings, this is more about like the seatbelt buzzer. You get into your car, right? I can't start my car unless I put my foot in the brake, but it'll buzz, tell me that my seatbelt's not done up. So that's kind of warning systems. And then finally, the last one is mitigate and mitigate or lessen the impact if a problem occurs. So this is where things like inventory management come into play, right? If you can manage your inventory more effectively, if something goes wrong with that inventory, you're not losing a whole lot. You're losing a lot less. So thinking about how do we go about if a problem does happen and a defect happens, how do we mitigate the damage more or less? So this is kind of the hierarchy of thinking about error proofing. Any comments, thoughts? Yes, no, resonate, doesn't? What are you thinking?
I think they were all good points on the mitigate, and everything comes with balance, I guess, but with a mitigate approach on, let's say, planting sizes for cauliflower, you might plant every week for 12 or 14 weeks type of thing. If you were to plant maybe twice a week or for 14 weeks, you'd have a smaller batch size, but then your incremental, I'll say maybe management of that might offset that benefit, right? So I guess it comes back to finding a balance, but
yeah.
So I'm really just thinking out loud here, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good. No, hey, I'm glad you are, right? Because you're right. There is that again, whenever we go into Lean and Lean Six Sigma, we talk about this. Again, I'm just showing you a few of the real essential nuggets, right? But that whole risk management element is very big in what we do. And we have what's called an FMEA, failure mode and effect analysis, which talks about risk in 3 dimensions. It talks about the severity of the risk. It talks about, and you use it, so you rank the severity of the risk and you multiply that by the likelihood of that happening. So how likely is this to happen? And then you multiply that by, do I have the ability to detect it before it happens? And so we call that a risk priority number. And so we help organizations kind of rank those up and say, hey, how do you manage those risks? Because to your point, the mitigation or the corrective action to some of those needs to vary depending on the degree of the impact, the severity of the impact, because you usually can't impact severity. What you can do is impact the likelihood of something happening or your ability to detect it before it happens. So the severity, if it happens, is probably doesn't change much, right? If you think about something catastrophic, right? Like an accident, a head-on collision, the severity of a head-on collision is still going to be as severe, but the likelihood of that happening diminishes based on the mitigation of the equipment in the car, right? And the detection that it's going to happen is even better. So, you know, my vehicle, for example, as soon as if I'm in an oncoming vehicle, it'll all kinds of bells and whistles go off, brake, you know, all this kind of stuff. So the whole idea of managing those three elements is your risk is really important, and you hit the nail on the head there. No, good point. Nicholas?
I can actually think of one scenario in which if you don't mitigate it, it actually makes it worse.
Okay.
And that is on one of the robots. There's bushings in a pivot point on the arm. And I told the farmer, like, he wanted to change the bushings, wanted to save money, so he didn't replace the housings that those bushings were in. And I said, well, these won't last. And he got 14 days out of them, 12 days, and completely wore these bushings completely out because the housings that they were in were also worn. So anyway, it was just the one scenario that, you know, what I learned is, you know, there's certain times where you can put brand new piece on, but if you haven't fixed the entire problem at the same time, then that new piece ends up being just as worn out as the old one in a shorter period of time than if you did it properly to start with. So kind of a PM point at, you know, preventive maintenance type of thing, but and it becomes, you see that a lot more in repetitive movements, right? Machinery or whatever that's doing that.
Yeah.
Repetitive movements.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's a really it's a really great point. No,
And I guess I should say is I was there for maintenance, and he chose to not do the complete job, and I was back for an emergency service call after hours to finish to finish the job properly.
Right. So you think about the waste, right? Think about, you know, the costs associated with that, which kind of gets me to this point here, right? So that's really a nice segue. Wow. And that is, you know, you've really got to log your problems, and you've got to get to kind of the root cause of those problems. Because if you don't log the impact of that problem, it's going to lessen the likelihood of you ever addressing that in the long term. And so if you've got a problem log, then you can say, hey, this was the problem. This was the impact of that problem. Then you can determine, do I need to get to the root cause? How often? You can look at your frequency, and you can look at how often things happen, and so on. So I just used a couple of examples. These I made up, by the way, of things that could go wrong, right? And you say, hey, you know, the west fence blew over in the wind, and, you know, it was two and a half hours to fix it, and, you know, $260 worth of materials or whatever. But, you know, there's always an impact to a problem. We need to understand what the impact is, and we need to record it, because you may not be able to fix everything all at once, but you certainly need to prioritize based on your available time to be able to actually do something. So recording your problems. Do you guys have like a problem log or record log of challenges or issues?
I would say not in totality, no.
Okay.
No, we would like from, and again, this goes kind of, some of the stuff's driven by our food safety plans and health and safety plans, but like from a food safety perspective, we have to monitor, maintain maintenance logs, and we do maintenance logs anyway, but maintenance logs and then issue logs as well. If part breaks while the green onion cutting machine is running, you have to obviously monitor that and record that, and then record your outcomes and such. So we do a bit of it, but certainly not everything.
So that, you know, again, I think there's an opportunity, and this is not just for you, Alan. This is in general with people, with any organization, my own included, where we can capture when things don't go according to plan, that we capture what those are. And they may have no impact. They, like I said, it'd be like me drifting outside of the center line and nothing happening, you know. But if I wrote it down and then I start to realize, gee whiz, you know what? I've been last 7 rides, I've, you know, 3 of those I've drifted over the center line. That's a signal. It's a signal that I need to potentially maybe, you know, take the
And
safety
that-
course again.
That's where I would say recording the problem is less for the fact of having it recorded, as more giving you now a quantitative number in which you can choose to either invest in a new piece of equipment because you're spending, you know, X amount repairing it already, or it also can give you that trend factor. You know, one particular equipment I dealt with, the preventive maintenance protocol was every 4 months. At 3 months and 16 days, it failed month after month, you know. So I just switched to a new maintenance protocol that was 3 months and 15 days, and I never had that problem again. And some of that is, you know, because the equipment is sold, sometimes the maintenance interval is based on hours, sometimes it's based on time, and those don't always take into consideration, you know, the hours of use or the hour, you know, it's the average hours of use, not your, you know, when they use days and it's actually hours of use that's affecting. In this particular case, it was based on time, but we had 10% or 20% more cows we were putting through the equipment. So it was being used that much more that, you know, the failure rate should have been based on number of samples versus time. But for most, the average farm, time works. But so it gives you a very quantitative number to then make further analysis and business decisions.
Excellent. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Absolutely, totally with you on that one, Nicholas. Which brings us to this tool, and maybe you've seen this tool before. I don't know if you have or not. It's called a fishbone diagram or cause and effect diagram, and it is because it looks kind of like a fishbone head, supposedly. And the idea is that you identify, you know, whatever issue or problem you have as your output, and this is a case of you know, the condemned birds from Maplewood Farms that we talked about. And then we created what we call, this is just a sample of it, the 6 M's. So you look at measurement and maintenance, you look at the materials, you look at muscle, you look at machine, you look at methods, and then you look at Mother Nature. And muscle really means the people doing the work. And so here you start to say, hey, what can, if birds are not being condemned, what are some of the reasons that the birds are being condemned? What's causing that? And so you can start to brainstorm, you know, with your group or with your team on some of those conditions, and then you start to categorize them, and you can start to do some analysis on them as to whether or not they have the biggest impact, not the biggest impact. If you start to see common themes, that kind of thing. So this tool, again, this is one of those essential kind of, I haven't done a continuous improvement project where I didn't use this tool, where I just simply said, let's do a cause and effect. Let's do a 6 M's, you know, and we kind of walk through why things were the way they were. And you start to realize, there are things we hadn't thought about, or there are things beyond our control that we need to think about. And so we kind of use that. Have any of you ever used a tool like this or seen it before? No? Okay. So I'm giving you just a taste of it today, but yeah, you know, certainly it would be an effective method to think about using. And again, you can Google it, or you can reach out, or by all means, just reach out to me if you want to know a little bit more. There's also a link here, but there's a lot of good stuff out there on how to use this as an effective problem-solving tool. Which gets us into standard work. I want to talk a little bit about that and visual management. So I do want to talk about visual management. I want to talk about, you know, it shows you immediately what to do. If you've got signage and manuals and stuff, manuals are good for reference, but they don't drive behavior on the moment in the place. You want that. Prevents mistakes, improves your quality, reduces your costs. These are all the benefits of having standard work. and it goes into visual management. So I'm going to just show you another one of her videos on visual management. Where is it? Right here. Okay. I think this is it here. Pretty sure. We'll see.
So another tool that we've started using, and it's part of our visual management boards, is the standardized season plan. And what it essentially
No, this isn't the one I wanted to show you. I'll show you later.
work that we've got planned, particularly all the repetitive stuff for the entire season. So our season starts on the 1st of June, so we start on the 1st of June and it goes all the way through to the 31st of May. And it basically covers off all of our key activities that need to happen during that season. It's a really valuable tool that takes all that stuff out of your head so you don't have to keep remembering everything, and puts it onto one visual format so that not only it's clearer for you and you've got better control, but also if you do have a team that works with you, it makes it so much easier for the whole team to see what kind of activities are coming up. What we've done is we've categorized the season plan into certain categories, and you can choose what type of categories you do for that. But we've basically got people, so people category, and that's all our training, our performance reviews. We do weekly CI meetings. We've got monthly big picture meetings. Then we've got management, so we've got some management stuff in here. We've got feeding, so all of the key feeding decisions that we need to make, key feeding milestones, things like that. We've got herd management, so everything that we're doing with our herd, from when we test our pedometers to when our dry offers, all of that kind of stuff. We've got animal health, so some of the key things that we're doing with animal health, including all of the vaccinations, drenching, vaccinatory checking, all of that kind of stuff. We've also got a category for our young stock, so R1s, R2s. We've got a dairy shed infrastructure section as well, and we've got some nutrient section, and also our pasture cropping section here. And what that means is that you're much better prepared to make the decisions that you need when you need to be making them, rather than realising, you know, getting to October, for example, and realising, oh, whoops, we haven't thought about bulls and we need bulls out in the next 2 weeks. So you're already, based on this plan, making those having those discussions and decisions back here in May. So we've linked this entire season plan to a electronic calendar as well. And so we basically get pop-up reminders of all this stuff in our electronic calendar. So what this tool will do is essentially, if you decide to go on holidays for 6 months, say, someone else can come here and know actually what's happening on your farm. So it's a really great tool that takes everything that's in your head, puts it on a piece of paper in a visual format, and it lets everybody see, anybody basically can come onto your farm and know what's happening, what's going on, what are the key things coming up, and be able to essentially manage that farm.
So yeah, that just another example that she talks about as it relates to that. So I'll find the other one that I want to show with you in just a second. But visual management should simply be able to drive behavior. As I said, if it's not driving or changing behavior, it's not having the impact that you want it to have. It's also a way for you to notice when there's non-conformance. So if you've got a team of people and you have a team leader, right? The team leader is able to see the non-conformance of the process right away. So they see when things aren't the way they are, and that it's really important for you to be able to identify when things aren't the way they're supposed to be before something serious happens. And so here's some standard work that we introduced at Eden Valley. And so what you'll see is that these are all 11.5 by 17 sheets of paper. These are not fancy or anything. This was all done basically using everyday PowerPoint software. And we just went and took some pictures of people doing the process. And what we did was, here's the step-by-step of what to do. So there's a description of what to do. There's about how long it should take them to be doing that activity. And then there's a picture of it that we've actually identified. So we do that. So here we've run through, we have identified a quality component. So here's what you need to check for quality. And here's the safety component. Make sure you're wearing, cut-proof gloves as an example. And here we've said what the pace should be. So they should be producing 24 every minute. So again, it's a way for you to manage, monitor and measure the performance of that process. They have this idea that, you know, I don't have to pump through as many as the machine can do in order to ensure the quality. I can do 24 a minute and still maintain my goal and still maintain the quality. So, and this is another example here, step by step for how to trim a chicken breast, for example. And there's the thighs, and they're supposed to do 8 thighs every minute, 8 seconds of thigh, or 30 every 4 minutes. So we can monitor that. And these are step by step. And this is kind of what to do, how to do it, pace to do it, quality of it, safety while doing it. And it's all done on one page. Do you guys use anything like that? Again, I'm going to turn to you, Alan, because you've kind of got the biggest, I believe the biggest farm that's in the team here.
No, but I've argued that we probably should have for the last 5 years, but we haven't put it in place.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it's really about thinking about where is it going to be the most effective, the fastest. You don't need to do this for maybe your entire farm, but there probably are some jobs that you would say, wow, you know what? This is really going to be a proactive activity. If we do this, and I do this with some of the actual workers and help develop it, they'll own it. And once they own it, then they'll conform to it.
I started doing some of that on a dairy processing building. Didn't quite get that full level there, but kind of the similar concept. Running the CIP programs, having pictures of where the buttons are, what the buttons are. So having that all laid out on, didn't quite get it down into one sheet. I was kind of going with some detailed, but it was all laminated, posted on the wall right beside the equipment so that they could just refer to it immediately without having to go to the SOP book.
Which is great, which is really good. So at Eden Valley, we had to laminate it because they have to be washed down and sterilized every day, right? For at the end of every day, they have a complete wash down. And that's probably the case in some of your farming areas too, that you have a cleaning protocol that you have to adhere to as a part of CFIA. So having them laminated is a really good idea. At Canada Post, we didn't have them laminated. At Canada Post, we had them in basically page protectors. And so that if somebody came up with a new way of doing it, and it was a better way to do things, we could just create the new standard work, take the old one out, slide the new one in, and we didn't have to go get them laminated, and we didn't have to do all of that. A little bit more challenging in an environment where you have to kind of keep them basically sterile. So I get that.
Yeah. So one of the issues I ran into, which I haven't quite figured out the full solution to, is mounting them on the wall in that processing area. How do you make sure they stay clean behind it?
Right.
And you have to remove them, clean, and then put them back again. So,
right.
The only scenario I came up with was Velcro 3M tape. So then it was removable and put back again.
Yeah. And so at Eden Valley, we actually had them in clips, and I don't know if I could show you a picture of that or not. Yeah, I do actually. When I do the huddles, you'll see that in just a second. You'll see how we solved that problem. So because we had the same issue. So visual management should, it's about organizing your workspace. It's about, creating up these visuals, and really about keeping score, right? If you've got a team of people and you've got teams of people, and even you, Chelsea, between you and your partner, like, what's a good day look like? How do you know when you're winning? What's the score going to look like? And I know that sounds kind of corny, but imagine playing sports without keeping score, right? I was talking to a teacher the other day, and they said, well, we do that now. I said, what? Really? Yeah, when kids play, we don't keep score. What do you mean you don't keep score? Who keeps? I mean, I said to her, you may not be keeping score, but the kids are keeping score. I can tell you that, right? So when you think about, keeping score, what does a winning day look like? And so at Eden Valley, it was about ensuring that they had a certain number of kilograms being produced every day, and they were being, monitoring themselves against that. For Maplewood Farms, it was about ensuring that all of the, the chores that were being done, and at the end of the day, they were successful with certain elements of work, that kind of thing. So how do you win? What's winning look like? So this was the production boards, and this is what we introduced at Eden Valley. And they're very similar to the production boards that you just saw on the Lean Farm as well. And which is why I really, when I saw that, I thought, oh, brilliant, this is great. So you're seeing how these, they're visualizing their day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, annual activities and monitoring them in a visual way, not on a computer. Although you heard from Jana in the video, she ensured that this was all populated into her Outlook so that she got pop-up reminders. And if do you guys use Outlook as a kind of an email methodology and calendar? What do you guys use for?
I use all of them. Outlook, Teams, G Suite,
Okay.
Google Docs.
Okay, you use them all. All right. What about you, Alan?
Yeah, Outlook would be the primary source.
Okay,
So-
Chelsea.
Right now we're using Google for everything. So Google Business, Google G Suite, the whole nine.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to very quickly, gotta keep my eye on time. We're good. We're doing good for time. Just going to very quickly show you. So if you don't use Outlook, there's lots of different ways you can use Outlook. So what you'll see with me in Outlook, you'll see that when you look at my calendar, everything is color coded. And it's color coded because I can use categories to determine what it is I work on. So I can tell by color what client I'm working on and what time I'm working on. So you think about categories. So if I go to my email, if I go to my emails, and I can open that up in a different window. If I go to my emails, I try to work on a zero inbox, but every day my inbox is zero out. So I make sure that that's the case. But when I have an email, I can categorize my emails, and I'm just going to show you here. So I have a number of categories by client, by type of business, type work. And so what I do is, rather than have a whole bunch of folders on the side, right, and I put it into a folder, I simply create categories and I basically tag it. So when I search, I don't have to think, well, what folder did I put that in? I know, oh, this one's to do with, NSFA. So all of my NSFA tagged emails will all be when I hit that, they'll all come up. If it was continuous improvement, I can have a continuous improvement. If it was Lean Six Sigma, I can have Lean Six Sigma. So I can multiple tag every email. And so it allows me to organize a lot differently. I also have here, you'll see that I have tasks here. I have my tasks filtered. So if I create a new task, I have it filtered that only those tasks I designated for today will show up here today. I don't have this big long list of tasks with a whole bunch of red ones for the ones I didn't do. I only see the ones I designated for today. So the Outlook management piece is kind of what she was talking about in that video, that you can transfer your plan into an electronic format that works for you. And if you haven't done that, again, we can support you in making that happen. It's part of visual management. Do you guys use it that way, Chelsea?
We do, as of right now, for categorizing our scheduling, putting it into our calendar, trying to keep everything just as organized in one ecosystem as possible.
Great. Excellent. What about you, Nicholas?
I have done certain components of that. My biggest challenge is finding one system that can cross over between mobile, desktop, and then of course I've run into security issues with work. I run two phones for the last 15 years, one personal and one for work. And I say personal, the personal one is also my farm business one too. So kind of running all three. So trying to keep things separate yet together on one device has been the challenge, especially when certain things work better in, let's say, Outlook, and then other stuff you're still using Google for.
Totally.
Been the biggest challenge. So I've done certain elements of that in each one, but
yeah. I can understand. I know when I used to have a manual system and then I had that system and to your point, now we've got like Teams, and so where do you put your files and stuff? So yeah, they don't make it easy for you, but if you're disciplined and you can, and certainly if you're managing two phones and on two different systems, then it can be a little bit more of a challenge. But that whole idea of using technology to your advantage to help you stay organized and on a specific plan is kind of the goal here. So whatever the plan that is, but of visualizing it in a way, it keeps everybody involved, keeps everybody on the team, and it's a bit more engaging. We're visual people by nature. We're visual people. Here's the huddle, and this is what I was talking about there. Nicholas, I don't know if you can see it. I'll blow it up a little bit so you can see it. We actually used clips, stainless steel clips. And so we put the stainless steel clips. So the standard work was put to the stainless steel clip. So every night the sanitation team would just take them off the clips, put them into a tub, sanitize them, take them back out, and put them back up onto the board. So don't know if, stainless steel clips might be an option for you. And what you'll see is that the boards were also in frames that could be unclipped so that the sanitation crew could take them down to wash behind the walls. So they were literally on clips that turned and just locked them into place.
Yeah, I'm going to say the next step is to set up those clips of some form. I never thought of having it out. Makes sense when you're running on a conveyor line that you have those instructions close by you. But that actually, even having it there, I guess they have a plexi board behind it, but you could potentially, depending on the location and the movement around it, you could just have it on the clip and you could literally sanitize both sides of the paper as you went.
Exactly. It was that way. They put the plexiglass because of COVID. Right. So that was how they had to maintain operation. So before the plexiglass, the clip was just there and it was two-sided. Yes.
Right.
So, but again, it allows the operator to look and say, and the supervisor, even a brand new supervisor, can come in and look and say, okay, all right, you're doing it the way it's supposed to be. Yeah, you're doing it right. Or gee whiz, you're trimming that awfully fast. Do you know you can take up to 8 seconds to trim that, because we'd sooner have a quality trim than a fast trim.
And one thing I've noticed, and you run into it in teaching and training, as I do a lot of training with De Laval as well. A lot of people don't want to admit they are not confident in what the actual answer is. And so if they have to leave the line to go verify, or if others can see them look it up in the book, then they're not going to go check. But if it's available there for everybody and they can take that sneak look at it without actually making it, having anyone see them do it, they will, and they'll do a better job. They'll perform better because they can create that confidence in themselves without anyone noticing.
Exactly. And I'll be honest, it's a bit of a quality check too, because they actually hold each other accountable.
I've seen it in managers. They can keep, and I've also seen in managers where managers who don't actually do that task don't actually study the book well enough either.
Right. And so exactly. And we had them at Canada Post, and we would have supervisors that were, they didn't come up through the Canada Post ranks. They were hired off from another industry or another, would come in, and they would be, to your point, they'd be able to look and they would know. They didn't have to rely on the employees to tell them what was right and wrong. Yeah, which is good. And so using that board, I talked, and this video is to that board as to why to use that board. I think it's actually on YouTube, which is why. Yeah, this is the video I wanted you to see.
Hi, I'm Jana Hocken, author of The Lean Dairy Farm. Welcome to my 3-minute Lean Farm series. I hope you enjoy this video and it helps your farm.
Farm. Don't you like that? Farm. Helps your farm.
A key lean tool that we've been implementing on farm is visual management. And we've used these visual management boards
to basically display all of the information, important information required for the team to be able to do their normal everyday work, make the decisions that they need, etc. Now, visual management is really important. It's probably one of the key tools that's going to make a really big difference to your business. And even if you work on your own or with your partner, visual management is great to basically get all the stuff that's out of your head onto a visual form like this, onto a board or onto some sort of paper or whatever, so that your head is less cluttered. It's going to be much less stressful for you, but also it's going to help with your organisation and planning, and you'll be in much better control of your business. If you do have a team, then visual management like this is absolutely vital to get better team engagement. What it means is that the team has all the information in front of them. It's completely transparent. The team is therefore engaged in the process. They're able to use the information to make the key decisions that they need to be able to operate the farm and run the farm. It means that they're using real-time, fact-based data to make their decisions, and it's just got huge benefits like that, and it means that the whole team is just essentially on the same page. Now, these visual management boards are a really powerful tool to stay focused, make sure everyone is aware of the key priorities, and to be results and action focused. So if you want to achieve results, if you want to get actions done, then these are a great tool for that. The visual management boards can really be whatever you want them to be. So there's no right or wrong answer. There are certain things that you want to have on them, but the important thing is that the team is engaged in developing them if you have a team, and the team is therefore working out, well, what's the key information that they need to be able to make everyday decisions and run the farm, basically. If you want to know more about how lean management principles and tools can help.
So I share that with you because, again, she talks about the importance of visual management in these boards. So these are not just for industries like production plants and in manufacturing. They really do transfer well into your environment. And I just took a screenshot of one of those boards. I want to just, in the few minutes we've got left, I want to talk a little bit about that work I did with Maplewood Farms, because I think it kind of, again, brings home the application of the DMAIC methodology to find, measure, analyze, improve, control. So I'm just going to take a minute to walk through that. Any questions about what we've done so far as it relates to kind of visual management? Have you kind of got a new appreciation for what it is and how it might be effective for you? Both two heads are nodding, so I'll take that as a good thing. Okay. All right, good. And we got a few minutes left. So when I got engaged with Kim and Joel at Sheffield, at Maplewood Farms, Kim and Joel Sheffield, their concern was they were getting condemned birds that weren't being able to go to market. And of course, they weren't getting paid for those birds. So it was costing them about $1,000 a month, so $12,000 a year in lost revenue as a result of that. So they engaged us through some grant money that was available that helped. That we went in, or I went in and worked with them. And so what we did was we looked at their at Eden Valley Poultry was giving them data on their flock, but they didn't know what to do with it. They couldn't interpret it really well, and they said, okay, we get this information, but we don't know what action to drive from that information. So I went in and worked with them, and we looked at, they have two barns. Burn one has 3 floors. So each floor holds about 10,000 birds, and barn 2, their big barn, holds about 18,000 birds. And so when we went in, we looked at the different barns. We looked at the data by barn and to see whether there was anything different. And what we discovered in the measure phase was when we looked at the birds and the barns, that 98% of their condemned birds were being condemned because of 3 conditions. So those three conditions were what we call subcutaneous conditions, which is cellulitis, abdominal edema, which is like a heart condition, and the third one was a hepatitis or a liver condition. So we looked and we said 98% of the birds were being condemned for those three conditions. 85% of those birds were actually because of two conditions. So we looked at those. What we were able to do is look at the different barns and the condemn rate, and we were actually able to do some statistical tests, which showed us that barn 2 and barn 1 had a higher condemned rate than we would expect given the number of birds that each barn holds. So we were able to do some statistical analysis to say there's something different about barn 1A and barn 2. Then we actually looked at further and we realized that barn 2, as it relates to the heart condition, has a statistically different condemned rate to the other three barns. So barn 1, we looked at those. So barn 2, we could see statistically something's going on in barn 2, which was really surprising to them because that is their newest barn. And they thought, well, if that's the newest barn, they expected that to be the best barn. Turns out that there was some conditions in that barn that were not in the other barn, barn 1. They're also in the process of building a brand new barn. And so they wanted to learn from what we could discover so that as they're building this new barn, they can take these considerations into place. So we saw here that 83% were because of these two conditions. And as we started to analyze it, this is one of the things we discovered. And what we discovered, and we used an industry expert. I'm not an industry expert, but I do know how to use data and information to make informed decisions. And so we started to look at the data. And what we learned was the CO levels, the CO2 levels in that barn were higher than would be considered to be optimal. And so you'll see here, so anything above 3,500 pieces per million was considered to be not optimal. And you'll notice here that there's quite a bit above that. So we started to look at those barns at the oxygen level or the CO2 levels in those barns, the ammonia levels in those barns. And what you'll see here is, again, you'll see a fairly big difference in those barns. So what we were able to do in the improve phase was to make some recommendations around making sure they do air monitor quality monitoring for the ammonia and the CO levels in those barns. Make sure the ventilation systems moved that air more frequently than it was before. We looked at the carbon dioxide, the carbon monoxide, the ammonia levels, and we were able to help them identify the optimum thing. The other thing that was kind of random was when I went into the barn, I noticed that all of the chicks were against the concrete walls, the edges of the barn, not all of them, but a majority of them. That's where they would congregate. And so I would say that if body temperature and young chicks can't control their own body temperature, so they can't do that until they're about 7 to 12 days old, they start to regulate their own body temperature. And I knew based on the industry expert that low body temperatures would cause the heart condition, the ascites. And so I made an observation that your birds are all congregating at the walls, which are concrete, which are colder than the rest of your barn. So your barn's 37 degrees, but at the walls, it's a lot cooler. So that was an aha for them. And so part of their improve phase was they started to create little barrier gates that would keep the chicks from going against the concrete so that the chicks would stay in the warmer part of the barn. And so those were kind of the things that we looked at. And so the air quality and keep the barn chicks away from the walls were the two things that we took at. So all of the manual information that they were collecting on sheets, we converted into a tablet. And so we were able to produce for them real-time graphs that were just in Excel that would tell them what the temperatures were, what the weights were, what the CO2 levels were, the humidity and all these and so on. They were actually able to see and monitor that real time against targets. Because while they had the information, because they were all just numbers, they couldn't see the pattern, they couldn't see the trends, they couldn't see the direction up or down, where the things, the variability, because they were just looking at a sheet of numbers. But once we turned that sheet of numbers into a self-populated, and all they had to do was key in the numbers, the graphs would produce themselves, they started to be able to make informed decisions around things like ventilation, things like temperature, things like, you know, the air quality. So we did this in a real time with tablets. And so now that's what they're doing. They're starting to use tablets and entering that data real time. It meets all of their regulatory requirements for keeping that information, and it supports them in better management operation of the barn and the barns. So that was they did that for basically, you talk about creativity over capital. We didn't have to spend hardly anything. They already had a tablet. They just weren't using it. They had all the things. It was a way for us to support them. So what's next? I'm going to turn this back over to Caitlin to kind of talk about what's next as it relates to this kind of program.
So I think the only person, maybe Nicholas, you weren't here at the beginning when I kind of talked about the NSFA project in general. So there's a few more of these types of sessions coming out. We're obviously going to try to make them as accessible as possible. So there's some summer months we're kind of skipping. But from now right until October, there's 4 more of these types of sessions. And we're also going to do the connection tour. So touring facilities or farms that have already implemented these types of practices, and those aren't quite set yet. We're still trying to locate some people who are willing to host us. And then the CI challenges will be actually applying some of these principles. And I've put a call out to some people to be willing to host those. And that opportunity will present itself hopefully kind of the end of summer into the fall as well. Or actually, I won't bother pulling it up, but the last 2 parts of this are the funded pieces. So there isn't necessarily a requirement to have gone to an info session or a connection tour or a challenge in order to apply to the funding piece. Yeah, Gary, you're reading my mind. Yeah, so there's 2 kind of last tier. So the in-depth support will be people who are willing, or sorry, not willing, wanting to kind of put this stuff into practice right away. And I had said previously that there's funding up to 85% of the cost. So what Tier 4 looks like is bringing on a consulting firm or similar, like an expert in these types of things, to come onto farm and help you work through an identified problem. And then we'll give you 85% of those costs back. So it's not going to cover, you know, if you have to invest in new equipment or those kinds of things. It's more of that consulting or training your staff, that piece. And there will be an application process for that. So coming out in May, we will distribute or make available the guidelines for what that funding looks like, and then the application process as well. Not that it's going to be super intensive, but we'll be looking at things like if you have actually identified a need, not just, hey, I want to do something, but like a specific issue, the feasibility that we can actually get it done. This isn't going to be a multi-year undertaking. Sustainability, things like that, and that will all be in the guidelines, kind of what we're looking for in those applications. And they'll be scored and reviewed not just by me and not just by the NSFA. Actually, we're going to have a few people, hopefully someone from Barrington, Department of Agriculture, myself from the Federation, and so trying to make it fair across the board. And those applications will be accepted starting July 1st. And then, timing of when these are implemented will be based on, the farm schedule. But we're hoping to have these ones wrapped up by the end of January of 2023. So if anyone has questions on those types of things, you can let me know now, or I think you would have all gotten my email, I guess, to get this link. So you can just email or call the Federation, ask for me. But also, if you're subscribing to the e-news, these will be coming out from the Federation. And as well, the Farm and Workforce Development will have this information on the website as well. So kind of my team's individual site.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Excellent.
I have a quick question, I guess. On the tier 4 type projects, I mean, there's quite a range of scope there probably. But what do you guys perceive that range of project costs to kind of, and I guess you could go to any consultant that does this sort of consulting. So again, there could be a range there, I guess, as well. Or is it Barrington Focus that's going to run those sessions, or
So
what's that look like?
what we're looking at is, I think we have 10 days. I don't want to tell you anything wrong, so give me 1 second here. But it's 10 days per farmer facility, and so we're looking at about $10,000. So that's kind of the cost, give or take. And so, not to kind of put a damper on Gary here or Barrington, but we're going to let them, like, you can come to us and say, these are the consultants we want. We're going to promote Barrington, and those are the people we're working with. But if you have someone in mind, or someone who's, certified in Lean Six Sigma or continuous improvement, like, this is who we want to use, by all means, that can go on the application. But we're averaging about $10,000, give or take a little wiggle room per project. And then that tier 5 is just for that little bit of extra. If tier 4 wasn't enough and that those 10 days weren't enough, it's a couple extra days. Say if you need help with shutting down everything to implement the solution. So it's just that little bit of extra boost.
Sure. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
So I thank you. I have I want to keep, I respect your time, and we said 4:30, so I do want to finish at 4:30 on time. I have posted in the chat a link to our survey. That feedback survey is really important for 2 reasons. First of all, that NSFA requires some sort of feedback component as a part of the funding for the program that this is putting on. So they need to have participants' feedback. So please complete it for that reason. The other reason is that it gives Caitlin and I an opportunity to kind of look at, we've got a number of in-person sessions that we're going to be holding. Your feedback can help us say what works and what doesn't work with that. So, there'll be a little bit more different engagement, obviously physically, than there would be virtually. But if there's anything about the content that you felt was good, or anything that you felt needed to be changed or modified, please provide us that feedback. It's good for us. And and so and as Caitlin said, when it comes time to the other phases, we'd love to be involved if you feel that we can meet your needs. So okay. Any last parting thoughts or questions, feedback, anything on your minds?
Nope. I think this session was great, and I appreciate your time today.
Okay, I appreciate your engagement. It was great. Yeah, and yours too, Nicholas and Chelsea. Thank you. And Niels, I know I had to probably drop off, but I was glad to have
enough
him.
in time. He hasn't got the robot in yet.
Yeah, there you go.
Next investment.
Yeah.
No, thank you. It was good.
Yeah, so
I agree with
appreciate you.
Alan's comments.
Great, appreciate you being engaged. Chelsea, hopefully you found it valuable.
Very much so. Thank you very much for including me and just kind of allowing me to work my way through some of this stuff. Like I said, this is my first foray into any of this, so it was a really, really informative afternoon for me.
Great, good. All right, Caitlin, closing
Yeah,
words.
I was just gonna say, just keep an ear out for when these connection tours and challenges do have some set dates, and I'm going to try my best to spread them around the province. Like I said, the challenges will hopefully be somewhat commodity specific, but if you're in produce and only a dairy one is the day you can go to, I would still recommend going if you would. I think you'd still benefit from seeing some of this stuff in person.
Okay. All right. Thanks,
Awesome.
everybody. Enjoy. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody. Thanks so much.